ونشعر أننا شركاء حقيقيون مع هذه المقاومة شراكة الجهاد والأخوة.
Israelis need to live free from rockets and from tunnels that threaten them.
يجب أن يسعى جميعا لإنهاء هذا النزاع.
We use missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles.
Good evening. You're watching I-24 News. I'm Lucy Arisha, and this is day 20 of Operation Protective Edge. After Israel rejected a ceasefire proposal this weekend put forward by the United States Secretary of State John Kerry, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Operation Protective Edge would continue until long-term quiet returned to Israel. He told on a round of interviews on United States television that the IDF ground troops in Gaza were continuing to neutralize the tunnels Hamas had dug under Israeli border. According to documents leaked to the Israeli media, Kerry's ceasefire proposal did not guarantee Israel could continue its search and destroy mission in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, attempts to forge short-term humanitarian ceasefires have met with mixed results. One on Saturday was large observed, but one called on Sunday was violated by Hamas, which continued firing rockets. And the fighting in the Gaza Strip goes on. Palestinians put the death toll in the Gaza Strip at more than 1,000 people. Israel's casualties stand at 43 soldiers and 3 civilians, one of them a Thai foreign worker. And joining me right now, and I'm proud to have him here in the studio, is Minister of Environment Protection and former Defense Minister Amir Peretz. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming to our studio and for giving us this interview. Mr. Peretz, until when can Israel continue this operation?
Yes, I think that we are in a situation whereby the definition of the mission is rather accurate. The strategic target is to succeed to deal with those attack tunnels, and it's not simple. I live in Sderot, and one of the tunnels that was exposed 1,000 meters from my own house. It was 100 meters from the kibbutzim. So I myself, as a man of peace, I understand that these tunnels tend to attack. This is something that has to end with this operation, that they don't exist anymore. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a situation that any minute that the Hamas makes a decision, all sorts of combatants are going to come in, are going to penetrate into the kibbutzim. They can abduct children and citizens who have nothing to do with the war. And that's why I hope that this mission will be completed. And then we have to think of some mechanism that will create quiet between Gaza and Israel.
And you know, I'm hearing you, and you are sitting in the Security Cabinet, and you are seeing the decision-making that Israel is taking for the last few days, and you were the Defense Minister. Do you think that if you were right now the Defense Minister, these are the decisions that you would have taken to continue this operation? And we're seeing that the death toll among the Palestinians are only rising up, and on the other side we're seeing that the death toll among the soldiers is going up as well. Do you think that it can continue? Do you think that the decision making in the Israeli government is the right decision making right now?
Yes, I think that the government of Israel is behaving very cautiously. After all, the Hamas could have agreed to the ceasefire before the land operation began. I myself was against the land operation, but from the moment, instead of agreeing to a ceasefire, there was a penetration into one of our kibbutzim in Kerem Shalom, and altogether, in a way, you know, just because because of the alertness of our soldiers, it was exposed. So as far as we are concerned, this is a threat, and I think that we have to create a mechanism that will bring about ceasefire. But Hamas has to understand, we cannot agree to what was before. Even the Palestinians have to be interested. Look, the main problem is to create a connection between Upper Gaza and Lower Gaza. If there'll be a situation whereby the money is going to go in order to build Gaza, to build hotels, to build schools, to build hospitals, not to build tunnels. That's why there has to be a connection between Abu Mazen and other moderate factions, including Egypt, that will supervise the money that goes to Gaza, that it doesn't go to tunnels and to missiles. So the question is, they ask, why did they reject the proposal of John Kerry? Because really, John Kerry wanted to bring about a ceasefire, and we respect it, and we appreciate what the Americans are doing, their efforts. But to give such a position to stream the money in without any supervision, to bring back the Hamas to a situation that it can rebuild everything, it has to be prevented.
I want to take you to something else. Still with the same, of course, same subject. From what we are seeing on the ground, a lot of voices in the government are calling for reoccupying or recapturing or, recontrolling the Gaza Strip. Do you think that it can be done to recontrol? Is it in Israel's benefit actually to reoccupy the Gaza Strip and recontrol and try to do let's say, force the same situation in the West Bank on the Gaza Strip as well? And are you, as a minister who's sitting in this current government, will agree to go back to Gaza and that Israel will control Gaza all over again?
No way, no way. I am against to go back to Gaza and to control it. I'm against reoccupying Gaza. We don't have any such goal. I think that the moment we're going to end the issue of the tunnels, we have to think of a mechanism whereby we end this war and to go back to a situation that is better. But we must do everything possible so that Abu Mazen is going to be the main factor, because 3 months ago, just that, they established a joint government, and the Hamas said that it agrees that the joint government of the technocrats, so to speak, is the one that's going to manage both Gaza and Judea and Samaria. Okay, the Egyptians are suggesting that the forces of Abu Mazen will go to the Philadelphia axis, where the very important passages are. The Egyptians suggest that Abu Mazen is going to be a factor that will supervise what's happening. We are very much in favor of moderate factors. I want to distinguish. We have no war with the inhabitants of Gaza. We do have a war with the terrorists. And I want you to know, I got a letter from a Palestinian youth movement in Gaza. They say, help us. We are here in a terrible situation. You shoot at us. The Hamas shoots at us. Everybody shoots at us. We are going to lose our childhood. Allow us to live. I want you to know that my daughter has an association and like an NGO of Israeli and Palestinian youngsters. It's not simple in this period. We believe in peace. My family, I present the peace. But unfortunately, the terrorist organizations cause the situation that they can ignite the flames, and we have to make sure that their position will be different.
So when you're saying that, you know that the Palestinians are not seeing it in the same way, or maybe seeing what you're saying and experiencing what you're saying, and they do want to do something, but they're not actually able to do it because they are afraid of what Hamas will do to them, because they're afraid that they will end up being killed by Hamas because they are trying to resist what is happening there. So let's try to look at it in the next phase. Let's try to look at it after the operation. Don't you think that Israel should provide the help to the people who are living in Gaza, maybe to try and help them get out of this miserable situation?
I definitely in favor of that. I definitely think that we have to create a formula, as you said, that the more the upper Gaza is built and they'll give up the lower Gaza without any tunnels, we have to open the passages. If we have to give them access from the sea, we should do it. If we have to help them build a port, we have to do that as well. There's no problem whatsoever. The moment we'll find out that all the investments actually go in order to help the citizens of Gaza, the state of Israel should be the first to be the leader, the ones that assist. That's our role. The more the situation of the Gaza inhabitants will be better, there'll be less terror. Unfortunately, the Hamas knows that very well. That's why they prefer that the Gaza inhabitants will live in poverty, in distress and despair, because that creates
Mr. Peretz,
terror.
it seems that with your point of view, with your way of thinking, it's not the same way of thinking of the people who are sitting right now in the government, the people who are sitting right now in the coalition, because the people who are right now sitting in the coalition, they think that Israel should reoccupy the Gaza Strip. They're taking everything to the right extreme side. Will you be able to get up and leave this coalition if they will continue pursuing these ideas of reoccupying the Gaza Strip?
Up to this moment, our truth is winning. They're pressuring, they're trying in every way to bring us to a decision to occupy Gaza, and they do not succeed. It's true that, unfortunately, that the more the Hamas continues to behave in such an extreme way, they come, what do you want? There's no partner to talk to. But I tell you specifically, we will not agree, no way, to any process of occupying Gaza, to re-manage it. The state of Israel should not be responsible for education or the sewage or the health of the Gaza inhabitants. They have a leadership. Abu Ghazan was elected. He's their president. Allow him to be the boss. And I want to tell the people of Gaza and to tell them it's about time that they will take their future in their hands. Stop allowing the terrorists to control you in such a way that they're using you. Unfortunately, in Israel, there are a lot of peace people who will agree to do everything in order to change the reality.
You know, I think that each and every person, civilian, citizen in Israel is basically every day getting up in the morning and saying, thank God for Iron Dome, and thank God for Amir Peretz for taking the decision to put this plan on the table and let it be built and let it continue. Are you proud of it?
Look, I think that what I get from the public is great love and great appreciation and thanks. But I also tell you, to the question, at the time when I made the decision to start with the Iron Dome, was against everybody, the military, everybody. I thought out of a perception of peace, because I said to everybody, look, the Iron Dome is going to be a tool which will be operational, military, but it will also be a political tool, because today what's happening to the Hamas? Everything it does with the rockets, it feels frustrated. And I hope it makes them make a decision to come and sit at the negotiation table. Also, you said if we reoccupy Gaza without the Iron Dome, maybe long ago we would have to send 5 divisions into Gaza, because there's no other choice. We have to come to the last launcher. That's why the Iron Dome is also a dome of peace. It has a political message, a civilian message, a very deep perception, and I'm very happy that it succeeded.
Mr. Amir Peretz, you have to tell you thank you on behalf of the citizens of Israel, and thank you for coming to our studio and giving us this interview. Thank you very much. And attempts at forging short-term humanitarian ceasefires have had mixed results. On one, Saturday was largely kept, but another attempt this morning failed to get off the ground. Meanwhile, despite intensive efforts by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, a long-term diplomatic solution to Operation Protective Edge does not yet appear to be on the horizon. I-24 News correspondent Uri Shapira reports.
Humanitarian ceasefire? Perhaps not. The last few days showed how delicate and complicated a ceasefire could be, as both sides called for one and both sides violated it. After a humanitarian ceasefire was broken by Hamas earlier on Sunday, the Palestinian militant group announced on a 24-hour truce starting from 11 GMT.
In response to the assessment of the United Nations and taking into consideration the condition of our people in Gaza, especially in light of the coming of the Eid holiday, there were discussions between the factions and they have reached an agreement to accept the offer of a 24-hour humanitarian calm, starting from 2 o'clock on Sunday.
But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu charged that Hamas already violated it by launching rockets towards Israel. On Saturday, Israel dismissed the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's proposal for a week-long humanitarian ceasefire. Netanyahu insisted that his administration will not accept any long-term ceasefire initiative other than the Egyptian one accepted by Israel and declined by Hamas 12 days ago.
The Egyptian initiative is the only game in town. And the Egyptian initiative will also enable us to get what I think are the prerequisites for a sustainable period of quiet. And that requires, in essence, the demilitarization of Gaza.
Kerry, who held meeting with Qatari, Turkish and French officials in Paris, welcomed the cooperation between the different factions, even though his diplomatic efforts have not yet borne any fruits.
Express my appreciation for the enormous amount of work that both Prime Minister Atiyah and Prime Minister Davutoglu engaged in the last days to help bring about the short-term ceasefire that we all hope is going to be extended into a longer-term ceasefire where people can get together and work on.
The next few hours may be nerve-wracking for those who are asking for a ceasefire, as more rumors and suggestions are being thrown into the air. But perhaps the biggest challenge will be to deal with the consequences of this offensive once it's over, leaving the two main protagonists in a very difficult reality.
Yes, and to look more at the current situation, joining me right now is Yoav Limon, military analyst for Israel Hayom daily newspaper. Good evening. Good evening. And also Ruth Wasserman Lando, former Israeli deputy ambassador to Egypt. Good evening. And also Tzvi Barel, Middle Eastern Affairs analyst for Haaretz daily newspaper.
Good evening.
Good evening. So, Yoav, let's start with you. Let's look at the weekend and the day that passed.
Let's look at today. The Israeli cabinet is meeting right now and having to take a decision whether to extend the ceasefire with an extra day. Tomorrow is the feast of the end of the Ramadan and maybe the most important day for the Palestinians. So Hamas requested an extend to the ceasefire of another 24 hours. Israel would have accepted that, but the fact that twice during the past 24 hours, after Israel had said yes to the request of Hamas to cease the fire, Hamas fired at Israel and took responsibility for doing so, including shooting to Israel, to the airport, etc., etc. So Israel is very reluctant in doing that tonight. The cabinet meeting last night that dealt with Hamas's request for a ceasefire was very, very, it was too close to call between the cabinet minister. At the end, it was, the vote was in favor of the ceasefire. I'm not sure that the vote will be the same tonight. Some of the key elements like the IDF, like the secret services are against renewing the ceasefire because they feel that it would be playing into the hands of Hamas. Hamas is controlling the cards currently. And more than that, the feeling in Israel is that the key powers, mainly the US, is playing a wrong game vis-a-vis the talks that are at the end about to bring maybe a permanent ceasefire. The Americans approved the Qatari-Turkey offer for a ceasefire. Israel was furious. Egypt was furious. Abu Mazen was furious. The Americans ignored all of their three allies in the area, the Palestinian Authority, Israel, and Egypt. The Americans stepped back last night. But currently there is quite a big distance between Jerusalem and Washington, Cairo and Washington, and Ramallah and Washington. John Kerry is trying to buffer that distance. It all goes down to the Israeli cabinet and to Hamas, who still doesn't seem like a force who's about to break.
Before I will ask you, the three of you, about the strange, let's say it in this way or another, connection between Qatar and the United States, why they're almost trying to agree on certain things, although we know that Qatar is helping Hamas in this entire operation. I want to ask you, we heard today, Mr. Barel, we heard today that Hamas officials are saying that the muqawama is still, the resistance is still happening, but in the benefit of the people of Gaza, we want a ceasefire. Of course, something else is hiding behind this sentence. Are they giving up in one way or another?
They're not giving up anything, because what they are now claiming, or they want, and they haven't changed their position so far, is a strategic outcome for themselves and for Gaza. They represent Gaza. I mean, they are still the government in Gaza, in spite of the reconciliation between Gaza and between Fatah and Hamas. And what they are demanding is not on the tactical level like Israel, but on a far-reaching venue, in fact, which is releasing Gaza from the siege, opening the passages in Rafah and to Israel, reconstruction of Gaza, and so on and so forth, because they feel that they are not definitely an organization like Israel depicts them, but they are the governing force right now, and they are responsible for the people. This is why they are, from time to time, demanding this kind of humanitarian ceasefire or whatever, and on the other hand, they stick to the same points that they stuck to just all along the whole operation. So it is, in a way, playing not a double game. It's the same games they are playing all along, with the basic demands that they are asking, but with some kind of, giving the people some fresh air or so. We are also, I heard several views saying, okay, now it is the opportunity for Hamas to look around and see how deep and how big is the damage that they have caused the population. But, this kind of approach is filled with contradiction, because if we consider Hamas anyhow to be a kind of an organization that doesn't care about the population, then it shouldn't care, according to this logic, to what is happening in Gaza. If, on the other hand, Hamas is and kind of a political entity, not just an organization, then yes, I mean, you bear some of the damage. You know that something has happened. It doesn't need to see the daylight in order to know what kind of damage has been done, but you still have an aim. The bigger the destruction, the bigger the demands. So this is how an organization, not just an organization, a political body like this operates anywhere.
Ruth, we've been talking a lot about Egypt and how it's playing a key role in this entire operation, and can it really bring some kind of a ceasefire or an agreement between Israel and Hamas? But how is Egypt going to play with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, and with Qatar, and with basically the entire Arab League, who's getting into this whole mess, let's call it. How they're going to how they're going actually to try and build a bridge between all these fractions?
First of all, Egypt is very adamant with its vision vis-a-vis Hamas. Hamas for Egypt is very much like the Muslim Brotherhood. They are extremely angry at the fact that Hamas has been hurting its internal, I would say, jurisdiction within the Sinai. Very, very furious at the killing of not one and not two Egyptian soldiers, and they won't forget it very quickly. So the anger towards Hamas is very much in existence. Furthermore, they're very afraid that the instability in the Gaza Strip will leak into the Sinai Peninsula and, of course, into Egypt, given that they have the Muslim Brotherhood breathing down their necks as is within the Egyptian border itself. And the third issue is the regional issue, the hegemony that Egypt seeks and never stopped seeking, Dunya, after all, the mother of all nations in the area. The question is, how does Egypt see its role in bringing about a certain kind of agreement? They're adamant, as I said before. They are furious at those partners within the Arab League that are not in agreement with the regional, let's say, solution that the Saudis have put on the table in terms of a kind of understanding or peace with Israel, or a kind of a regional understanding. And they will do everything in their power, and they won't let go, together with the partners in the region, and there are enough moderate partners, until the Hamas and Egypt, we must remember, holds the key to the gate.
But in the process, they are becoming the new enemy of the Palestinians.
No, not really.
Not really, I agree.
How
would you like to?
Well, there is a difference between Hamas and between the Palestinians in Gaza and the Palestinians in the West Bank. Egypt always had boasted itself as the Palestinian cause protector, and Mubarak and Sadat and of course Sisi always remind the world, especially the Arab world, that the Egyptians had shed a lot of blood for the Palestinian cause, and nobody can teach the Egyptians what is to love the Palestinian cause and to help the Palestinian cause. But Hamas is a different story. With Hamas, there is a different account. And I agree fully with Ruth about the idea that Hamas should be punished. I mean, according to the Egyptian perception, Hamas should be punished. And Hamas probably would have been better off without this war, because on the eve, or let's say on the eve of the war and after the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, the Rafah passage was on the verge of being opened for Hamas. There were some kind of disagreements, but still it was on the table. Right now, it's on hold.
We are just going to see what is happening right now in the Israel-Gaza border with our I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben Ari. Shai, what is the latest down there?
Yes, Lucy. Well, this evening it's again heating up here as evening falls. Basically, we're standing in front of the northern Gaza Strip. I'm talking about the area of Beit Hanun, and just recently we could actually hear a lot of gunfire, which is actually, it's pretty rare that you can actually hear gunfire, but we were hearing quite a lot of it basically behind us. We were also seeing some tank activity, tank fire, and also occasional artillery bombardments. This is basically something that we weren't really hearing earlier in the day, despite Israel's rejection of that ceasefire. It seemed that Israel was taking it slowly earlier on, with the Palestinians doing most of the firing. We're talking about over 60 rockets being fired from Palestinian territory towards Israeli towns. But now, as evening falls, it seems that the IDF is again shifting into high gear, at least here in the northern Gaza Strip. Basically, we're talking about a situation where, with all these ceasefires that have been in the air and on the table, basically a case of hooplings first or chicken. But neither side really wants to appear as the weaker side in this conflict. So basically we had a situation where Hamas was putting forth a ceasefire proposal today, or accepting one from the UN, and Israel rejecting it. It was the other way around last night. And basically we can't seem to get any sort of consensus around a ceasefire, and so far it appears that we're back to fighting.
Yes, Shai Ben Ari, thank you very much for this. And let's see what is happening on the other side of the border. And with me on the phone is Meha, resident in the Gaza Strip. Good evening, Meha. Meha, can we say كل عام وانت بخير? Happy Eid.
Thank you very much.
If we can say it these days. How are you surviving the last few days?
First of all, there will be no Eid in Gaza because we have to mourn all the martyrs of the latest attacks. The whole situation is still tense. Today we thought that there is a truce, but apparently there isn't, because both sides continued the attacks. Just in the last 2 hours, they bombed a building and they killed a few people and injured many. The whole situation is still, people are still worried. We need this truce. We need calm, because we are tired of being tired. How much is too much? We can't take it anymore. People are scared all the time, and maybe our Eid is tomorrow, and there will be no Eid. We don't celebrate anything here, and people are just waiting for the next hours, just to see what might happen in the next hour or in the next day. They are still displaced from their homes. They are still in churches, in schools, in their relatives' houses, and wherever. They are everywhere, and people here are really, just tired, really tired, And,
you're only, Maha, you're only tired, or you're also angry?
I am angry too. I am very angry, actually. I'm angry with both sides, because the civilians of both sides are the ones who usually lose. I know that there is no comparison between the loss of both sides, but what about the civilians? What about us? The leaders are interested in military solutions. We need peaceful solutions. We need the life here. We need our children to have a brighter future. We need the youth just to have a good life. We need life. We don't have life here. We've been under siege for more than 8 years, and this operation, this military operation, is the third one in 6 years, and we can't afford losing more than 1,000 people, mostly civilians, every a year or 2 or 3 years. This is insane. This has to stop. They have to sit together. The leaders, they have to sit together and find peaceful solutions. We need a lasting peace agreement. We don't just need a short-term or a few hours ceasefire. This is insane.
Maha, grown-ups usually try to reason things, try to understand things, and you sound like a real reasonable person. But children, it's a different story. How do you explain to the children in Gaza the current situation, and how do you prevent them, if you can, from hating the other side, from growing this hatred among the Palestinians and the Jews, if we can say, or the Israelis?
No, they've been experiencing trauma after another, and believe me, the children are very smart, and they understand. Some they say, no, we need this to stop. We need peace. We need just to be safe. We need to play. And others, might carry the grudge over the years. The children of both sides. We need this to stop. Now in the schools they have recreation activities, and they try just to help the children cope and get them play games and do some recreational activities to them, just to help them overcome this trauma. But the bombing is everywhere, and they hear it, and they see the killed and the injured and the blood everywhere. And how can they survive trauma after another? As for me and my family, we don't speak about the hatred or the grudge or about the enemy or about the Jews and the Hamas and whatever. You just stay at home and just say, like I explained it like fireworks, But this is the only way we can cope inside our homes, Or it's like popcorn, we cover their ears, but it helps in a way, but still they feel scared whenever they hear an explosion, and our windows broke several times, and it's hard to explain to children. It's very hard. They feel scared to go to the toilet on their own. We take, we take turns accompanying them. They still, they didn't survive the first trauma, and each year there is a new one, and even the smaller attacks in the last few months. But this one is major, is even much worse than Operation Cast Lead and the one in 2012. This is beyond words. This is catastrophic. The scenes of destruction everywhere.
I want to wish you a happy Eid and كل عام وانت بخير. And I wish that the children in Gaza will, in fact, you will tell them that what they're seeing outside is fireworks, and there will be fireworks and not attacks or missiles. Maha, thank you very much for this. This is, you hear this, and did you see the people in Gaza, and you hear the people in Gaza, and they're asking, they're crying for someone to stop this. Is Israel even considering? Did the military, because we heard at the beginning, we heard at the first days that the infrastructure of Hamas was not hurt at all. Can Israel say after 20 days that they were able to complete the mission by hurting?
Look where you started the question, Lucy, and where you ended it. You started with that poor lady in Gaza who we all heard and we all felt the same in the studio. I mean, we wish she weren't in that situation. We wish that she won't be in that situation. We wish that someone will find a solution for the huge problem of the people in Gaza, which, I mean, we all cry out for them. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, you can't stand here, hear her and not feel for the people of Gaza. But you ended your question with the Israeli army and the question whether it fulfilled its missions. I mean, the missions are endless. It's up to Israel to decide where they end. If the mission is the tunnels, and that was the mission, it will take Israel a few more days to complete the mission. Then Israel will have to decide whether to stay in Gaza and go further and extend the fighting, or stay in place and wait for the peace talks or ceasefire talks with the Palestinians, and when they're over, pull back, or pull back unilaterally and tell the Palestinians, tell Hamas, if you raise your head, I will chop your head. That's another possible solution against Hamas, not against the Palestinian people. Israel has to decide what it wants from Gaza, what it wants from Hamas. I remind you that sitting here a month ago, everybody spoke of Hamas being in its weakest point ever. Currently, Hamas hold those talks like it's a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN, like it gives demands to Israel and to Egypt and to the US. The US played that tune during the weekend. It stepped back yesterday and today, but we have to wait and see. I believe that Israel will give up its concern in the Rafah crossing point vis-a-vis the salaries. Israel will only stick to the armament of Hamas, the missiles and the tunnels. And more than that, Israel will vote in favor of building a port and an airport in Gaza. Israel doesn't won't speak against it. Obviously, it will put many obstacles on the way, but it won't be against it, because Israel understands that the only solution at the end for the Gaza problem is economical. It's not an army solution or a unilateral solution. It's Arab money which will change Gaza for good. And one thing that Israel will try to make sure that will happen, along with Egypt, is Abu Mazen, the Palestinian Authority, to be existent in Gaza, in the crossing points between Israel and Gaza, between Egypt and Gaza, to get the Palestinian Authority stronger in Gaza. Is it possible? You have better experts than me in the studio.
You know, Lucy, as a mother, I cannot stay not empathetic to what Maha has said. And as Yoav has said, it's very rare to find people within Israel that don't feel very deeply for the people in Gaza. There are women and children and older people, and there's not one human being who can stay not empathetic to this cause. It's very, very scary and very, very touching, not in a good way, that the Hamas leadership, instead of caring for its own people and own children, puts them in harm's way. Instead of taking the money that has been pouring into Gaza and putting it into education and building houses and infrastructure and building sustainable sources of income for these good, normal people, it has put millions of dollars into building tunnels that have no other use than to attack other civilians on the Israeli side, and that is horrific. And given that horrifying reality, we are in an impossible situation in which Israel, on the one hand, needs to defend itself and its citizens on a daily, most acute basis, and on the other hand, needs to look out at the partners in the region, such as Egypt, such as Jordan, such as Saudi Arabia, such as Kuwait, such as partners that have a kind of a rational thinking about stability and prosperity for their own civilians, and actually come into terms with the fact that there needs to be a solution with 7 eyes at the back our back because we have absolutely no choice. But this is something that absolutely must be done.
Dr. Burrell, we know that there is a division between how the leadership of the Hamas leadership thinking in Syria and what is the Hamas leadership thinking in the Gaza Strip, because it seems that for the last few days the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip is maybe asking more to go towards a ceasefire than those people who are sitting in Qatar in hotels and calling for the Muqawamah to continue.
I think this is one of the imagined things that we are feeding ourselves all the time, that there is a split between the political Hamas and the military Hamas, that there is a split between the inner Hamas and the outer Hamas. In a crisis like this, there are divergences and there are a unifying factor, which is to fight Israel, which is to protect themselves. And this is not anything that will cause, by the end of the day, the decision. The decision will be made by a combined decision by Khalid Mash'al and his deputy, for that sake, and with their partners right now, mainly Qatar, because Hamas has to protect its resources. It has to protect its future, because this kind of war is an in-between between the reconciliation and the next political step, which will be the elections for the Palestinian Authority.
How come the United States is looking to
the United States, again,
let's say, rebuild its relationship with Qatar in this current situation?
They have good relationship with Qatar, and they have the biggest base in the Middle East in Qatar. And Qatar is an important country. We have forgotten that only yesterday Iran was our major enemy, and all of a sudden Qatar became our major enemy. Qatar was a good friend of Israel as well, and Israeli ministers used to boast the fact that
Israel still has a consulate in Doha.
And not a consulate, they have a representative.
Okay.
I wish they had a consulate, but and you know, we should remember that today the foreign minister of Qatar, Ahmed Al-Attiyah, went out and exploded not at Israel but at Lieberman and Bennett. That they have depicted Qatar as a terror supporting country. I mean, let's face it, I mean, Qatar is an important factor and an important actor in this area.
But I want to ask you a question. If Hamas would have received an offer from Egypt, for example, to get a different sponsor, let's say Saudi, let's say the Emirates, would they desert Qatar and go with a different wallet? I don't know.
Why should they? I mean, Qatar, we have agreed just a few months ago that Qatar would reconstruct Gaza by paying about $400 million. I mean, Israel had agreed to it. I mean, what should be different than that today? I mean,
and the United States has an
when
arms
you
deal
have
with
a country like
Qatar.
Egypt that persecutes the Muslim Brotherhood and persecutes by default, of course, the Hamas, why should they be friendly with Egypt? They need Egypt. They need Egypt for because this is the main vein of life for Hamas. Secondly, we have to remember, I mean, this is a heartbreaking conversation which you had with Maha. And we have to remember, I mean, we also tend to say Hamas should have invested in education and all kind of cultural activities and so on in economy. They have invested in culture. They have invested in schools. They have invested in hospitals, everything.
But still, it's the...
Just one second. But you know, they have invested also in what they call their security, in their own way of protecting and fighting the others. Israel does the same. You can claim the same about Israel. Why do you need such a big budget for the security? Why don't you take this budget? Why don't you make peace with the Palestinians, withdraw from the West Bank,
so
and you'll have enough money?
Israel thinking about the way to change the way of Hamas thinking and in putting the money in other places. It's basically what Hamas is doing, what you're saying, but for them the Muqawamah still exists.
We have to remember just a tiny little detail. The Gaza and the West Bank are under occupation. I mean, it is not a kind of Switzerland that says, okay, the Swiss are now investing in security instead of something else. They are having a national fight. And we tend to forget it. We are the occupiers. We are the ones who are imposing siege on Gaza.
We and the Egyptians.
fine. But until the Egyptians came in, we were the only ones to impose the siege. This is
but
already for
I'd like to remind that so many international... First of all, I agree with you that a regional solution and a solution is called for. There's no question that the situation cannot continue. But so many organizations and so many countries throughout the democratic modern world, the European Union, the United States, have first and foremost called the Hamas a terrorist organization, and not for no reason. And there's a difference between having a kind of resistance and putting millions and millions of dollars into attacking civilians for no other reason but to really instill fear and create some kind of a reality which is very difficult.
We had a balance of deterrence between Israel and Hamas, like we have between Israel and Hezbollah, like we had between Israel and Syria. We cannot just claim that they are coming at us and without taking into consideration what we are doing in the same time.
Gentlemen, my lady, thank you very much for coming to the studio.
Thank you for having
we are
us.
continuing with this special broadcast. Scenes of devastations greeted Gazans as they took advantage of a 12-hour humanitarian ceasefire to see what has become of their homes. Large parts of Gaza City have been reduced to rubble and the smell of dead bodies, of course, in the air. I-24 News reporter Daniel Campus has more.
Thousands of people in Gaza left their homes and shelters during a 12-hour ceasefire Saturday to discover that entire streets and neighborhoods now looked as if they had been hit by a high-magnitude earthquake. Israel and Hamas had both accepted a UN request to stop fighting from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. local time, a truth Israel unilaterally agreed to prolong by 4 hours. Many residents of the Gaza Strip used the time to try to check the condition of their homes, retrieve belongings, and in some cases search for the bodies of relatives. Scenes of devastation were discovered by those who returned to areas of intense fighting, such as Sajaiya neighborhood, Bet Hanun, and around Khan Yunis.
The situation is miserable. An earthquake 10 degrees on the Richter scale would not have done this. All the landmarks here have disappeared. We can no longer recognize the places where we grew up since we were 5 years old.
Homes pulverized, roads blocked with wreckage, broken electricity posts, bomb craters, and piles of gray cement with twisted metal scraps. The smell of dead bodies and animals yet to be pulled out of the rubble were part of the scene. So far, it is difficult to assess the scale and cost of the damage. An analysis by UNITAR UNISAT, an agency of the United Nations, found that about 600 structures had been destroyed in Sajaiya neighborhood, the site of some of the worst fighting.
Complete destruction. I came from Jabalia because I want to see what happened to my home. We haven't reached it yet.
As the fighting between Israel and Hamas continues, so far over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in the course of the 20-day campaign. The destruction is believed by many to have exceeded damage done in the Operation Castlet of 2008-2009 and Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012. The final assessment of the damage will only be made once a long-term ceasefire is agreed on.
Yes, and right now with me here, I'm happy to welcome Mrs. Liad German, the Israeli Health Minister. Thank you very much for coming to our studio and for being here with us and giving us this interview. These are not easy days, of course, on all of us. These are not easy days on Israel. And of course, I believe not easy days for you as well. We know that Israel is building and receiving a lot of patients from the Palestinian, from the Gaza Strip. And you think that the day after this operation will end, and of course it will end with a lot of destruction. Do you think that it's the responsibility of Israel to try and rebuild, from a humanitarian perspective, the destructions that the Gaza Strip is in right now?
Well, first of all, good evening. I'm very happy to be here this evening. And you're right. Times are not easy. These are very difficult times, and I think to all of us. You're asking me whether Israel will have a responsibility to rebuild Gaza. I'd like to start by saying that Israel, throughout this entire operation, really feels a moral obligation to give humanitarian assistance, of course, to the inhabitants. I can tell you that this morning I visited in the Erez crossing, and I saw a field hospital that we established in order and out of the hope that both sick patients and also injured people from Gaza, among the Palestinians, the population will come to that hospital, but unfortunately they do not arrive. They don't get there for the reason that Hamas stops them from arriving and getting treated. I can tell you that the Red Magen David offered the Palestinians blood, and I know that they need blood, and the Palestinians refuse to get our blood portions. I can also tell you that today we have prepared a humanitarian shipment of medications, especially for chronic diseases, and that too they refuse to receive.
Who is refusing, Mrs. Garman? Who is refusing? Is it the Palestinians, the civilians, or is it the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip?
I suppose that it's very difficult to talk to the Palestinians themselves. It's difficult to talk to the people. We only hear the Hamas. I don't know to what extent it actually represents the people, and if the people is not ready to get this humanitarian assistance. I think they do want it and they need it, and I know that there are Palestinians that are very interested to come to the Erez crossing, to the field hospital, and they are prevented by the Hamas. Hamas is preventing. And why am I telling you all this? Because I think that the responsibility for the rehabilitation of Gaza is in the hands of the leaders of the Palestinians in Gaza. At the moment, it's the Hamas. I also think that if instead of investing all the tens and hundreds of millions and all the hundreds of tons to build those disastrous tunnels that are only designated for destruction and attacks and death, had they invested it in the building hospitals, schools, theaters, buildings, kindergartens, Gaza would look completely different today. And maybe they wouldn't even start this attack of missiles.
Just before you was sitting here, Dr. Tzvi Bar-El, and he said they were investing in the culture, in buildings, in let's say rebuilding the Gaza Strip, but they were also investing in the military side, investing in building tunnels, investing in purchasing missiles. But the reason is, and this is what the Palestinian will say, is that Israel is putting the Gaza Strip under siege. Israel is still occupying the Palestinian territories, and Israel is not able, in this way or another, to reach a diplomatic solution with the Palestinians. Do you think that maybe Israel, in one way or another, is also the one to blame for not pursuing the diplomatic solution, for not insisting on the diplomatic solution?
I'll tell you two things. I'll ask I told you that this morning I was in the Erez crossing, and you know that the Erez crossing is also a terminal which was designated to transfer between 40 to 50,000 people a day. It was designated for that right after we disengaged in 2005, when the State of Israel decided about the disengagement. And there were a lot of discussions, but they made a decision. We disengaged. The idea was that in Gaza, the regime will have a free administration that will invest for the benefit of the Gazians, that will flourish the economy and strengthen Gaza. That was the intention. And when Israel disengaged from Gaza, it gave up all its control in Gaza. It's only after the Hamas took over the regime, and in 2001 they continued, even after 2005, to launch hundreds and thousands, more than 12,000 rockets to the villages in the south. Israel had no other choice. The second thing I want to tell you, that if you listen well to what the government is saying and the Prime Minister, he says that the solution to the crisis, to the war, because this is really a war. It's not just an operation, it's a war. The solution can be both military and diplomatic. I think if it will be a right diplomatic solution through which, of course, they will destroy all these tunnels and, of course, they'll demilitarize the Gaza Strip from missiles, I believe that if there'll be such a political solution, maybe there's something to talk about. But at the moment, there's nobody to talk to. And at the moment, what we see is that time after time, although we try and we're ready for ceasefires, the response and the answer to our ceasefires is launching rockets on dense population centers, on civilians.
I want to take you to something else, but something the same but different. And this is the inner discussion and the inner conversation that we're having inside the Israeli society. It seems that the Israeli society is going to the extreme. It seems that the Israeli society in the last few months is not able to speak to itself. It seems that the Israeli society is not able to make a dialogue among left and right, religious and non-religious, Jews and Arabs. And it seems that the government and the ministers in the government are giving, in this way or another, a kosher signature to this behavior of the citizens. Because at the end of the day, we are the citizens. We are choosing our leaders because we want our leaders to lead us. And it seems that the leaders that right now are in the government are ignoring the fact that there is a huge lack of tolerance in the Israeli society that could lead to even bigger war than we're already in.
I'm very worried from this polarization in the Israeli society in general and especially recently. I'm worried from the polarization from both sides. I'm worried when I hear the Dibah el-Yahud, and I'm also worried when I hear death to the Arabs. These two things cannot be heard. These are things that have to be deleted from our jargon. It should be forbidden. We should forbid to incite neither Jews against Arabs nor the opposite. I'm very worried by what you're saying. I see it in the society. I don't think that the government is the one that encourages it, because I see the reactions, especially on the internet and the talkbacks. And I'm shocked by the responses, by the lack of tolerance that we see in the talkbacks. I still believe that the majority, the large majority, both among the Israeli Arabs as well as the Jewish people here, most of them are seeking peace. They want to live together, and they're not extreme.
Maybe and I would just, it's in a small answer if you can, maybe at the end of the day, the politicians in Israel forgot that they are not having a conversation with their, with the citizens via Facebook, but they need to have a conversation with them face to face.
If you see politicians today walking around and talking with the population in this war more than regular.
Yes, unfortunately, we're lack of time, and I asked this question at the end, at the last 20 seconds. But Yael German, thank you very, very much for coming to the studio and for giving us this interview. Thank you very much. And thank you. We're going out for a small break, 2-minute break, and then we will be back.
في حزب الله نشعر أننا شركاء حقيقيون مع هذه المقاومة شواكة الجهاد والأخوة.
Israelis need to live free from rockets and from tunnels that threaten them.
يجب أن يسعى الجميع لإنهاء هذا النزاع.
We use missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles.
Welcome back to this I-24 News special edition. Of course, we continue our extended coverage of Operation Protective Edge. And right now, joining me in the studio, Reserve Brigadier Ephraim Eitan, former member of the Security Cabinet of Israel. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
And also retired Colonel Richard Camp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Good evening.
Good evening. And
also, of course, Reserve Brigadier General Ralik Shafir, the former commander of the Tel Nof Air Force Base.
Good evening.
Good evening. Gentlemen, after 20 days, let's look at this operation from the military side. Are the forces able to continue? Because we know all the problems that basically the military is facing in this specific area. Can the military continue this operation more and more and more?
I think it's obvious that the operation can continue, and it's only a directive of the Israeli government to the forces to actually either take over Gaza, demolish Hamas. It's a question of will rather than capability. And the question of will has to do with international diplomacy and that kind of maneuvering. So it's not a question of can it be done, it's more should it be done.
Should it be done?
Oh, no doubt, and I think that it's even more than capability, it's a clarity about what should be the end game, the end state of this war, of this operation, and that should be defined in a most clear way in order to move the forces toward that goal. And I think it should be defined by very clear achievements. No military capability in Gaza at the end of this operation.
So you think that Israel should reoccupy the Gaza Strip, if I understand you correctly?
It's not a matter of reoccupying means that we have to stay there for a long time and we have to run the day-to-day, life in Gaza. I don't mean that. I mean very much what we did as a model in the operation of defense wall in Judea and Samaria, that we broke the infrastructure, the capability, the chain of command of the embryo of what was supposed to be very much like what we see now in Gaza. And since then, we control it from the security and counter-terror warfare point of view. So we can come into the area when we have intelligence, when things are very small at the beginning of the build-up of the force, and destroy it. That should be the same, I would say, end game in Gaza.
When we're talking about destroying, demolishing, making it disappear, can it really happen, Colonel Camp? Because we saw that the Americans, the British, tried it in Afghanistan, they tried it in Iraq, they tried it. Al-Qaeda still exists, and we see ISIS right now, and we see the ISIL right now, and more terror organizations are just flourishing and building up. Can it really happen?
I think we're talking about a very different situation here in Gaza. And part of the reason for that is because Hamas have got nowhere to go. They're hemmed in, unless they're very fast swimmers, they're hemmed in by the combination of the IDF and the Egyptians in the south. And they literally can be picked apart, street by street, bunker by bunker, tunnel by tunnel. It's not an easy job. And but the further in I think that the IDF get, I suspect the easier it will become, because I think there's probably a harder edge presented by Hamas facing the direction that the IDF is likely to come from. So I think once that's been broken through, I suspect it'll be slightly easier to get in among it and literally destroy rocket launcher by rocket launcher, commander by commander, the fighting capability of Hamas.
Do you see any resemblance to what happened in Afghanistan, to what is happening in Iraq, to what is happening in any other part of the Arab world who's right now fighting terror cells?
There are a great deal of similarities. Each of these different extremist groups, Hamas, the Taliban, Hezbollah, the various different forms of extremists, including Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they use very similar tactics. They will not stand and face conventional forces like the IDF, because every time they do, they will be destroyed. When they attempted to face British forces in Afghanistan, for every single British death, 100 Taliban minimum died. They can't do it. They have to use hit-and-run attacks and tactics of that sort. There's no question in my mind, and I've been talking to IDF soldiers and commanders around the border this evening, there's no question in my mind about their capability and their resolve to do it. It's just a question of whether they're allowed for political and diplomatic reasons to do so. It's the situation they're facing, and these are very, very brave men. I've been moved actually by the bravery of the IDF soldiers, which is very, very similar to British soldiers. And I was talking to them about how determined they are to get in and deal with the enemy and master the chaos. The Israelis call it boligan. The Israelis call it boligan. We call it chaos. And the job of the military is to master that chaos and overcome the enemy.
I think we're witnessing now the catastrophic results of the West's failure to cope with this challenge of the radical Islam. Yeah. And now it's in the gates of Jordan, it's on our border in Syria, it's in Lebanon, in Gaza, and also in Sinai. If the Egyptians would have taken a very decisive, courageous action, that would have been an ex-territory for Al-Qaeda. What is very similar, and I want to demonstrate it in one sentence, which caught my mind and my intention when I saw it in the social nets, by some of the videos which Hamas sent to us. They say, we shall defeat you because we love death more than you love life. And in a nutshell, that's symbolizing the whole moral confrontation and clash between what we, Israel and the West, represent and what this dark culture based on ethos of suicide bombers, of death, of total, I would say, ignorance of life value.
And let me say so. What the West needs to do now is get behind Israel. Because these are not just Israel's enemies, these are the enemies of the West, and they need to get right behind them. We don't need to hear people carping and complaining because of so-called heavy-handed Israeli tactics. We need the West right behind Israel, because if not, then this enemy is going to be on our doorsteps even more than it is now.
If we, God forbid, fail, then the gates are open for this kind of chaotic ideology armed with all these missiles going everywhere.
This kind of
maybe this is the only solution.
This kind of a scenario of Armageddon is taken out of some books, and it's not really connected to reality. Even the people who had killed themselves on the Masada did not have an ideology of committing suicide. They were driven to it. So I think if we create an environment in which these people will have some hope, then some negotiations can start, because these are our neighbors for good and bad. There's about 5 million, 1.8 million in Gaza, and about 2.5 to 3 million in the West Bank. And if we create the atmosphere and the environment for them to prefer a good life, and a dignified life over death, then the ideology will probably disappear, because it wasn't there to begin with.
Nothing more wrong than that. This concept brought us to be defeated, because we thought,
I'm sorry, just one
life,
point.
Then they abandoned this.
Let me just put a dot here, and you will answer.
I don't agree.
You will answer.
Okay.
You will answer. I will let you answer. I just want to go to Soroka Hospital in Beersheba in the south of Israel to see with our I-24 News correspondent Eli Ochenberg how are the situation in the hospital. How is the situation in the hospital right now?
Well, Lucy, for the first time in 3 days, the siren alerts went off here a couple of hours ago in the southern city of Beersheba. And as the ceasefire situation is very unclear, the residents here are getting prepared to handle more of these red siren alerts. But here at the Soroka Hospital, we have 37 wounded soldiers that arrived here from the Gaza Strip. One of them is in a crucial situation. He's fighting for his life with the assistance, of course, of the medical team. Here we have 3 others who are severely injured, and the rest are suffering from light to moderate injuries. And we also have here, Lucia, 2 Palestinians from Gaza that are receiving treatment here. But the interesting thing is that all throughout the day, we can see hundreds of people arriving here, including public figures, celebrities, and Israeli citizens that are coming here carrying food, drinks, gifts, and other essentials to raise the morale of the wounded soldiers and their families. And it's really, you can see the joy of the people that are arriving here, really wanting to support these soldiers and their families, and maybe a small thing to smile about in these difficult days. But at the moment, the hospital is, of course, more than ready to absorb any other wounded soldiers. Hopefully, it will not be needed, but the medical staff here is doing is working as hard as possible to make those wounded soldiers to feel better, and we will, of course, keep you updated with any development from here, Lucy.
Yes, Leo Homburg, thank you very much for this. I promise, and I'm keeping my promise, and I'm letting you
what Felix said, of course, I totally disagree, and I think it's very dangerous, because this kind of naive approach, which say they suicide, they open fire, they destroy their countries and our country because they are miserable, maybe a little bit poor. It's nothing to do with that. Look, Lebanon was a flourishing country which was totally destroyed by this radical Islam. Iran had quite good economy, good technology. They just kick it off in order to implement this ideology.
Is it naive, or is it, let's say, maybe Israel doesn't understand and should not look at the Palestinians or the people in the Gaza Strip in the way that it looks into itself? Because the Palestinians have a different ideology. The Palestinians have different morals. The Palestinians have different rules. The Palestinians have different culture. Maybe Israel should stop looking at the Palestinians from its own eyes and start looking at it from the other side, that, like you said, in one way or another, parts of it
I agree.
Just identify more with death than with life.
I agree. I don't mean to say that those people do not need a basic standard of living that we want to share and everybody in the West want to share. I don't say that. I say that always this systematic brainwash from the moment children are born through the mosque and they are raised on this ritual of death, you could recruit endless number of suicide bombers, women, children, and men through a whistle in the marketplace. It's not something that you can even imagine when you talk about
and you think by seeing houses
cultures.
Destroyed, by seeing their houses destroyed, is the way to make them love the Israelis? How do you plan on educating them on a different way?
Three things. First, not to give them any military capability. This marriage between military capability and this radical Islam, radical ideology, whether if it's conventional and, God forbid, in Iran case, unconventional weapons, this marriage will bring the world into an enormous tragedy. So first, no capability. Then stop the propaganda. Don't allow to brainwash and to contaminate the minds and the soul of a whole generation. No matter what Ralik will tell them, the people in the mosque will be always more charismatic, more influential, and more inspiring than his offers for good standard of living. And three, we need patience. Those who does not want a long-term process, and they think that at the end that will, in a way, will be repaired and turned back in one day, or overnight. That won't happen. I think that the only similar cultures which were close to the experience of the Western world from other places is the Japanese at the Second World War. And the process of changing Japan into a stable democracy was a decisive victory, decisive defeat, disarming Japan, not allowing to build any military capability, and then a slow change, which at the end defeated the tradition of the Bushido, which was the background of all this radicalism.
I want to let Relik answer.
My friend Effie...
we are friends.
I know that you are friends.
Has an ideology, and he will not allow facts to dismantle any of it. Dehumanizing your neighbor and bitching about your neighbor is no way to make peace. I remember what Bertrand Russell once said.
We make a war now, not peace. When we end the war...
He said, I love humanity, it's people that I can't stand. And the idea is that these are people, and if given a chance, and I agree, by the way, about demilitarization, but given dignity, given space, given well-being, these are people just like all of us. And the same rules that apply to them apply to us. And by branding them as some kind of terrible people who cannot be trusted and have this kind of ideology,
they are terrible people. They cannot be trusted. They've proved it once and again and again.
This is a way to escape introspection.
Can I just inject here? I'm friends with both of these gentlemen. I hope anyway. For whom both of them I have
now you have
huge respect.
No. But
we'll all go and have beer. We don't have to choose in the studio.
I think I'm right in saying that Gaza is one of the most heavily subsidized, heavily invested in countries in the world in terms of aid from the international community. Massive amount of money have gone into it. And what's happened to that? It hasn't been spent on developing an economy by the government of Gaza, in other words, Hamas. It hasn't gone into somehow alleviating the plight of the poor people in Gaza. And I don't know what these two think. I feel huge pity for those people living in Gaza now and before, because they're now under huge aerial bombardment. They're under fire from the IDF on the ground, and they're under the heel of Hamas, who treat them probably, if anything, worse than the IDF are treating them. And I've spoken to IDF soldiers who have said that they have been told by Gazan civilians on the ground that they feel better treated by the Israelis, extraordinarily, by the Israelis than they do by their own people. But what have they done with all this money? What have they done with the investment? They've constructed a huge underground city with the one purpose of destroying Israel, which is, of course, the objective of Hamas is to destroy Israel. Something like 160 children were killed, died or were killed constructing those tunnels under Gaza. That's just children. There are plenty of adults died as well. I don't think we're talking about people who can be reasoned with or argued with. I think they have to be eliminated. Their military capability has to be eliminated, and something has to replace them.
Colonel Kemp, you fought terror. You know all about terror. Do you think that you can educate to something else? And after that, this amount of time, all these years, those people in the Gaza Strip, because Israel's not able to get into Gaza. We are not able to go into Gaza, except of foreign press, and we are here. Although we're foreign, we're not actually foreign. We cannot get into the Gaza Strip. But can you actually educate these people after all these years to something different?
I think it's extremely difficult, and the problem now that's faced will be even more difficult. With all they have to do is look around. They don't see their homes there. They see Stalingrad. They see the results of massive bombardment. They see the results of airstrikes. They see the result of artillery coming in. And I'm not criticizing that, because Israel, in my opinion, had no choice other than to launch this offensive against Hamas after they continued to fire rockets over a period of months, the latest barrage being since April. But what choice did Israel have apart from to do that? But a byproduct of that, on top of all the indoctrination they've had, on top of the being told, and we've seen videos of Palestinian children saying there is no Israel. These villages belong to us. The Jews must be destroyed. I've seen plenty of videos that actually taught to them in UN schools that I am paying for, my taxes are paying for. So I think the answer to your question is it's going to be extremely difficult, but clearly there has to be something done to try and overcome it.
It's difficult, but it can be done. If somebody would have come to you at the late or early 40s and would have told you that Japan and Nazi Germany will turn into stable, peaceful states, you would have said, no way. If somebody would have come and tell you that the Soviet Union will turn to somewhat a kind of a democracy, somewhat, yes, it's on the process, yes, but Stalin is very different from Putin, although some improvements are needed. Yes, but it needs 3 elements. Educating people needs time. You cannot allow this indoctrination to continue, as I said, and you need this transition time to make sure that those states, those societies are totally demilitarized, even by force, even by a very tight mechanism of control over the area to make sure that no buildup of military forces is allowed.
Let me just remind you the differences between the First World War and Second World War. In the post-First World War, the British and French and American levied such heavy taxes on Germany that it felt that it needs to go to war. Second World War, the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Germany, and the Germans did become nice in one day. But if you do not use a carrot and stick and only use the stick, you're just prolonging the suffering on both sides. And if you want to have a good life, you should have a neighbor who's got a good enough life so that he will have something to hope for and something to lose. And doesn't matter who's the other neighbor. This is the way humans operate. So it's not naive, it's reality at best.
I just wonder what made the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, who enjoy the best and the highest standard of living, to continue and think and prepare themselves for more terror.
But
What made the Lebanese?
The Palestinians in the West Bank are having an understanding with Israel. If you will ask the Palestinians in the West Bank today if they want to go for a third intifada, although we hear a lot of analysts are saying we are at the brink of a third intifada, they will tell you we don't want a third intifada. We saw what happened in the second intifada. We saw how much damage happened in the West Bank. We don't want that, because at the end of the day, when you are hearing the Palestinians, they are telling you, I want to take my plate and to put food on the table for my children. And if I'm living in a good way, I have a lot to lose right now if I'm going out for a third intifada.
I agree, but even now, when the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria enjoy a lot of freedom of speech and movement and flourishing economy, if they would have an opportunity to build terror, and they would have an opportunity to use armed forces, they would have done that.
And if us Israelis would have the opportunity, we would build more towns and cities interspersed so the Palestinians could not have their own state.
Okay. What we both agree, I think 3 of us, is that what we have in front of us now is to win this war and to defeat this arm of terror of Hamas, and to my humble understanding, that should be the minimal end game of this war. If we leave any missiles or any tunnels or any commanders and operational echelon active and strong, we'll have another round in a very short time. So as far as the current situation, I think we have a lot of common ground. As far as long processes,
What is the difference? Because we heard about, you mentioned the Operation Protective Shield, and it seems that Protective Shield had, let's say, a really big, huge success in the West Bank. Why can't it work in the Gaza Strip? Is Hamas different in the Gaza Strip than Hamas in the West Bank?
I think the population is somewhat different.
Human beings.
They're the same human beings, but unlike the West Bank, there are a lot more ex-refugees in Gaza. And when we left Gaza, we actually, if you may excuse me by saying it, we escaped from Gaza. It wasn't a deal. We had gotten tired of Gaza, went out, and they felt that they've been able to chase us out. That was a major mistake that Ariel Sharon had done by not coming into terms, some kind of terms, because he felt that he was going to get away with it. Unfortunately, he didn't get away with it, and that escalated into where we are right now. If we use the carrot as well as the stick with Abu Mazen and with the Palestinians, it will resonate in Gaza. But as long as we do not show enough respect and enough leeway in the West Bank, then the Gazans have nothing to hope for. And that is something for us to correct after we learn about this war.
Colonel Kemp, I know that you're coming from the military side, and I know that you're observing the military side. But as, let's say, an observer who's watching the current situation, do you think that maybe in one way or another Israel is missing the opportunity to actually make Mahmoud Abbas stronger in order to prepare him to control the Gaza Strip? As an observer who's watching the situation from outside.
As an observer who's watching the situation from outside, I think I'm very sceptical about Mahmoud Abbas. I wouldn't claim anything like the expertise of these two gentlemen on him or his followers, but I have severe doubts that he, as an individual, has any desire or intention to make any kind of peace with Israel. I don't see that, from everything I've seen from him and his predecessors and his followers, I don't see any intention other than, as with Hamas, maybe more covertly expressed, to create a single state, a Palestinian state. The Jewish state is an illegitimate entity, and I think that's felt as strongly by Fatah and by Abu Mazen or Abbas or whatever you want to call him. He seems to have a number of different aliases. I don't think that's any lesser desire from him than it is from the Hamas leadership.
In the neighborhood here, and the Israeli neighborhood, we call him Abu Mazen. The international media will call him President Mahmoud Abbas. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you very much, of course, for coming to the studio. We even didn't start talking about the settlements at the West Bank and the Judean side. Next time. Thank you very much for coming, and we're going out for a small break, 2-minute break, and Ghali just went out of the studio, 2-minute break, and then we will be back.
في حزب الله نشعر أننا شركاء حقيقيون مع هذه المقاومة شراكة الجهاد والأخوة.
Israelis need to live free from rockets and from tunnels that threaten them.
يجب أن يسعى جميعا لإنهاء هذا النزاع.
We use missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles.
Welcome back to this special I-24 News special edition, and we continue our extended coverage of the recent escalation between Israel and Hamas. And joining me right now is Ali Waqid, I-24 News senior Middle East analyst. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. And Mayor Javed Anfar, Iranian politics lecturer at the IDC here at Herzliya. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
I just want to look at the current situation because it seems that we saw Hezbollah speaking during the weekend, and we saw Iran, and we saw the demonstrations in the Arab world, a lot of flags of Hezbollah, a lot of flags of Iran. How is Iran looking at the current situation right now?
There were demonstrations on Friday. There was a Quds Day demonstrations on Friday. It's difficult to know how many people really turned up because each year they don't exactly tell you the correct numbers. Some people turn up because they want to, some people turn up because they have to. For their job, in each government office there is like the old communist system where there was a member of the Politburo who sat in each government ministry to make sure that everybody is a faithful communist. In Iran, in government offices, there's also the office called Hirasat, which basically looks at the behavior of people to make sure that they are within the lines of the Islamic Republic. So we don't know how many of them were actually there because they wanted to, but they were there. What's very interesting is that because Quds Day is the final Friday of Ramadan, it's also because it's Friday, there's a Friday sermon. And Rouhani was asked to speak on this Friday sermon, and he made up an excuse and he did go. But of course, on the other hand, he did say that the Arab world should unite to confront Israel. So, I think, again, on balance, he's, on the one hand, he's got to play to the security establishment, which is pushing him to say something. On the other, he knows that, he's got to go back to Vienna and face the Americans. So if he says something outrageously anti-Israel, it's going to cost Iran at the nuclear talks. Overall, I would say Iran is continuing with its anti-Israel policy, but with two limitations. One is the nuclear talks, because if they go too far, it could anger the Americans. The other is the fact that, Hamas turned against Iran, and people do notice it. And the Iranians are watching how the Turks and the Qataris are trying to steal their shows. So they are kind of like, they are encouraging Hamas, but from afar, and they're actually far more detached than they've been in the last decade.
So everybody talked about Iran being the biggest fear and biggest threat to Israel, and now it seems that everybody's talking about Qatar.
It's a different threat. Qatar has no nuclear bomb. Qatar has no bombs. Qatar has almost no army. Qatar
has a lot of money.
Has a lot of money, and in this money, they are trying to gain support among some organizations and states that are not in good relation in Israel, and hope that Israel one day will be out of this region. Lucy, I want to pay attention to the fact that what we saw in the weekend. The Israelis and the Egyptians, which has a common position, succeeded to face the Qatari, Turkish with the Americans. The Americans, who are still in not good relations with the new regime in Egypt, tried to oust Egypt from this talks, and at the end of the day, they were obliged. Exactly. The Americans found themselves isolated. It is amazing to say this, but in this equation, in this conflict of the Middle East, the Americans found themselves almost irrelevant to the talks about a ceasefire. And it is not simple that Israel and the Egyptians, two of the three biggest allies of the United States in the region, stand against the United States position. And one more thing that happened in the last hour and had an impact over Hamas position is the fact that almost all the Palestinian factions condemned the fact that there were no Palestinian representation in the international talks in Paris, and that the Hamas gave the mandate to negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians to Turkey and to Qatar, with no approval from the PLO, from the other Palestinian organizations.
There's one thing actually, looking at one of the articles today in a site, IR Diplomacy, which is actually close to the moderates, to the reformists, who actually were, Iran's zenith of its influence in the Middle East was when the reformists were in charge in Iran during Mr. Khatami's reign. And so when it comes to the Middle East, these people they really understand the ABC when it comes to the Middle East. One thing I think that Iran is really worried about is the destruction of the tunnels, because these tunnels were helping Islamic Jihad, which is Iran's ally, bring in weapons. And by the way, when I say Iran is detached, That's with the caveat that Iran was supplying weapons right up until Morsi was toppled. They were using the chaos to bring the weapons in, but around the same time, they
brought weapons even without this chaos.
Without the chaos, but then, when Hamas really started cooperating with the anti-Syria front, they moved away. But they are worried about the infrastructure damage that's being done in Gaza, especially to the tunnels, because the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is using that.
Let's see, what is the current situation, before we will speak about what is the current situation of Hamas right now, if it's still isolated like everybody's thinking. One of the big enigmas of Operation Protective Edge centers around the status of Hamas once the fighting is over and the dust settles. I-24 News correspondent Ur Shapira looks beyond the current round of violence.
Less than 2 months ago, Hamas stood on the verge of world recognition as a legitimate political faction after it joined a unity government with President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah faction.
Today, with the formation of a national consensus government, we announced the end of a Palestinian division that has greatly damaged our national case for 7 years.
Unfortunately for Hamas, problems were not long in coming. Only a few weeks after the formation of the government, Hamas launched a general strike in Gaza because thousands of their officials had not received their salaries for over 2 months. But that was only the beginning of Hamas's entanglement. Ever since Operation Protective Edge began, it has found itself in a critical condition, financially, military, and publicly. According to the IDF, Hamas has lost at least 40% of its long-distance missiles, and its ability to launch rockets at Israel has been dramatically reduced ever since the operation went into the ground phase. Now, as Hamas is losing its ability to smuggle weapons from the Sinai Peninsula, it is turning to other channels. According to reports, the Islamic movement is negotiating with North Korea for the purchase of long-distance missiles. But even with the support of Kim Jong-un, it seems Hamas is facing a difficult challenge to regain its military and financial edge. Another channel will be Qatar, which since 2012 has poured millions of dollars into the organization. After the humanitarian ceasefire began Saturday, the measure of the devastation to the Gaza Strip was unveiled. At least 1,000 casualties, dozens of smashed buildings, and a broken economy whose loss is hard to evaluate. And what about the public support in Gaza? Surprisingly, Hamas is also being defeated here as well. According to the Washington Institute, most Gazans believe Hamas has failed to deliver and show their support on Fatah leaders Mahmoud Abbas and Muhammad Dakhlan. With so much lost on the military, financial and political levels, it seems that Hamas has hit rock bottom. But as history shows, the situation may be reversed. With few smart moves, a ceasefire and a truce that will deal with some of the crucial problems the Palestinians are facing right now, Hamas can get back on track once again. At least until the next confrontation.
Ali, will they be able to get back on track?
The efforts right now are concentrated on the attempt to avoid Hamas to get back on track, or at least if they should get on track, they should get on track on the conditions of the Palestinian Authority, of the Israelis, and of the Egyptians, Lucy. Hamas in the last days launched a very strong campaign against the Egyptians, putting pressure over the Egyptians on one hand, and on the other hand, trying to rule out the Egyptian mediation and to find out the Qatari-Turkish mediation. And on the third hand, they try to present their achievements in the war against Israel, shooting still on daily basis against Tel Aviv, etc. In the last couple of days, because of the Israeli pressure on the tunnels, as Eitan said, and because of the international position that did not adopt the Turkish-Qatari paper, and Israel made it clear that the only paper on the table is the Egyptian one. This is why Hamas considered the Egyptian paper as an Israeli paper. So Hamas had no choice. Plus, today, the position of the Palestinian factions that condemned the fact that Turkey and Qatar represented the Palestinians in Paris. Hamas had no choice, and Hamas understood they have two options: or to suicide themselves, to launch this very huge offensive that we know that it could end on occupying the Gaza Strip by the Israelis, or to find a chair to go down from the tree that they climbed it very high. When the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip see the destruction, see the demolitions, Hamas understand that some of the fingers are pointing to their responsibility to this situation, and this is why Hamas is trying to find the way to get to an honorable end to this war without being totally out of the track, out of the game.
What's really interesting is that, the Egyptian foreign minister, the Egyptians called the Iranians and asked them to support their peace initiative. And the Iranians politely said no. And this is, again, I'm quoting Iranian news sources, but I'm not so sure that the Turks and the Qataris have asked Iran for help, because Turkey and Iran are actually competitors when it comes to this.
I want to extend this, I'm sorry for cutting it, just want to extend this, just want to go to Tel Aviv. It was to our I-24 News correspondent, Shahal Peled. It was a very quiet day in Tel Aviv, knock on wood, if we can say.
Very true. Good evening, Lucy. As we heard you mention Tel Aviv, it's been a very quiet day here in the city, with no sounds of both sirens, of code red alert sirens, all the noises and voices of protests. Yesterday, at this hour, thousands of people protested here against the operation as hundreds of right-wing activists violently demonstrated against them, with 6 being arrested by the police. And this has been an ongoing event in the past weeks as the operation is continuing. We've talked earlier to Asaf Zamir, who's the deputy mayor in Tel Aviv. He says that indeed this is a tough situation for the municipality. They are not used to the situation of ongoing violence in the city. They're very much used to protests, but not with this extremism and radicalism. And also he mentioned the businesses in Tel Aviv. I think for one of the first times mentioning that small businesses in Tel Aviv are very much suffering. People do not want to leave their houses. They do not feel like partying, and indeed the mood is down. We've spoken to some of the owners here of businesses. They said cafes and restaurants are down by 25%, bars and pubs even further, about 50% of their capacity is down. So the mood is indeed low, but also the situation, at least for today, quiet.
Yes, maybe the people in Tel Aviv should go and buy some things in Ashkelon and in the south of Israel. They're suffering much more than the people in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Shahal, for this. You mentioned the Turks and you mentioned Iran, and we know that the Palestinian card, is a huge card for the Arab world. It's the card that the Arab world, the Muslim world, is playing with every time that they want to speak about Israel or they want to speak about the situation in the Middle East. We've been talking a lot about the fact that Hamas was isolated, that Hezbollah was isolated, that Iran is trying to get out of the isolation. Where would Iran find itself at the end of this operation, and where would Iran try to gain from this operation?
Let me start from the end. This is our operation to lose. The only way Iran can win is if we come out of this losing. That's the only way. If there's some massive pressure that causes the state of Israel to withdraw without accomplishing its stated aims, or if there's all of a sudden, God forbid, some artillery lands in some refugee shelter and 100 people die or something. Iran is, can't do. Apart from that, Iran can't hope for more because of what's happened in Syria. I'm sure Ali can tell us also. You read the Arabic press. I wish I spoke Arabic. The reaction of the Sunni world has not been very favorable to Iran. The Zogby polls that was carried out by the Zogby Institution in the United States said that after the 2009 uprising, which was so violently put down in Iran, plus what's been happening in Syria and Iraq, more and more countries and people of the Middle East see Iran as actually a negative player in the region with negative influence. And so Iran is, really boxed in terms of Syria and can't do much. in the region.
So all the analysts were saying, or the rumors about Hamas and Iran actually getting closer in this operation are right or wrong?
There has been some, according to the Al Monitor publication, there has been some talk of rapprochement, but nothing full. No, it's the strongest link they have for now is the missiles that were supplied beforehand, and according to the Iranians, they supplied Hamas with the know-how to build some of the missiles that they're building. I don't know if it's true or not, but politically, it's at the moment not happening.
Lucy, the Hamas tried to knock Iran doors in the last 2 months or 3 months before this round of confrontation. Khalid Mash'al called the Iranian leadership at the beginning of the confrontation. Ali Larijani, the parliament speaker, called Khalid Mash'al and Ramadan Shallah, the Secretary General of the Islamic Jihad, trying to encourage them. But this is where the Iranian intervention stopped, at least at this phase, in encouraging them by words and not by concrete measures. The Iranian are, as Eitan said, their priorities are Syria and Iraq before Gaza. The fact that the IDF is leading at the moment a successful campaign against the tunnels in which the Iranian invested so much are demanding the Iranian for second thoughts about how to rearm the Islamic Jihad. Let's make it clear: the Iran will rearm the Islamic Jihad. Now, will they manage to skip the Israeli and the Egyptian security measures in this effort to rearm the Islamic Jihad? We will see in the coming future. The Revolutionary Guard did not give up the idea to rearm the Islamic Jihad. They will find a way to rearm the Islamic Jihad. Now, whether Hamas will join this route or will choose the route of the negotiations to be integrated in the Palestinian political life, it need to be seen in the coming days and weeks. But for the moment, the priorities of Iran are not Gaza. Gaza is important for Iran, but not as important as Syria and as Iraq. And the big question is, what will be Hamas leadership position? Are we trying to knock back Iran doors in order to open the treasuries of Iran and get financed once again by the Iranian, who are trying to prove to the world that they are maybe adopting a new, more pragmatic policy, or to join Abu Mazen effort to integrate Hamas in the political life. And Lucy, in one of the Egyptian scenarios is bringing back Mohammed Dahlan to be the head of the security services, maybe to be the head of the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. Dahlan is the biggest threat to Hamas. He is also in problems with Abu Mazen, but he is the biggest threat of Hamas. So Hamas is facing different scenarios, that every scenario is worse than the other.
So if we're talking about a public opinion, if we're talking about a Palestinian, you're mentioning right now Mohammed Dahlan. This is a name that I haven't heard in a long time, but he's a lot of people are, pointing fingers. You talked about the pointing fingers of the people, of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip towards Hamas. People heard Khalid Mash'al when he spoke. They heard his speech. He's sitting in Qatar, calling for Muqawma, when he's sitting in his hotel room, calling for the people to continue the resistance. On the other side, the people in the Gaza Strip are coming out and seeing the entire destruction. This pointing fingers that you're talking about may come also to Dahlan, because we know that Dahlan is the face of, I will say it, of corruption in Fatah.
Lucy, I don't feel comfortable with this division sitting in hotels, in chic hotels, and sitting, because Hamas leadership, at least officially and publicly, the position of Ismail Haniyeh, who is undergrounded in Gaza, and the position of Khalid Mash'al in the very fancy hotels of Doha, Qatar, are the same. So there is no impact over your position, according to what I understand from Hamas dynamism, between the fact that you are abroad, calm, safe in the 5-star hotel, and when you are in Gaza Strip. This is a Western way to try to differentiate. It used to be done also between the Palestinian leadership, those of the PLO sitting abroad in villas in Tunisia, and those who are in the West Bank, until we discovered that the position of the internal leadership of the Palestinian people who were in the West Bank was much tough and much hardline than the position of the PLO abroad, and this is why at the end of the day Peres and Rabin understood that it doesn't worth to talk with Saeb Erekat, and we should talk directly with Arafat and Abu Mazen, whose position are more pragmatic than Saeb Erekat and Haidar Abdel Shafi. So this is a Western Israeli way to differentiate outside and inside, and I don't buy it, because you can see Ismail Haniyeh, for example, shared the same vision, who is in Gaza, shared the same vision of Musa Abu Marzouk, who is abroad, and Mahmoud al-Zahar shared the same vision of Khalid Mash'al. One is inside Gaza and the other one. So let's not fall into this trap of abroad and inside.
So abroad and not abroad and inside. But the people in the Gaza Strip who are coming out right now from their houses, seeing their houses being destroyed, they're not pointing their fingers towards the leadership inside the Gaza Strip.
They are. They are pointing. Not all the people. Many of the people still believe that we should put an end to this siege that was imposed on the Gaza Strip since the 2006-2007, no matter what the price. Now, when we say no matter what the price, nobody imagined that the price would be this massive destructions in the Gaza Strip. But still, from these destructions, from the fact that people did not want this round of confrontation, and by the way, Hamas did not want this round of confrontation. In the 3 days, Hamas was trying to do all its best in order to stop the Islamic Jihad, the popular committees, from shooting, but it was not receiving the attention that they were hoping from Egypt, from Israel, from the Palestinian Authority, and from the international community, and they had no choice but to join this effort of the other political Palestinian factions. So,
which 3 days, Ali?
The first 3 days of the rockets that were shot against Israel, Hamas did not shoot any rocket. Hamas did not shoot any rocket, but the Egyptians were so firm in not wanting to talk, to dialogue with Hamas, that Hamas had no choice but to join this
jihad, the Islamic Jihad. So if we're looking at this current situation, because I want us to take us just a view
that the Israeli authorities, the IDF, were unanimous that Hamas doesn't want this round of confrontation. Hamas was obliged to go into this round of confrontation because they had no more cards to play with, no more cards. They gave up the Palestinian government to Abu Mazen. They had no money to pay their civil servants.
Yeah, we're forgetting that everybody's talking about, of course, the abduction and what happened afterwards and the murder of Mohammed Abu Khdeir and the deterioration of the situation, but we're forgetting that everything actually started because the money, because they didn't pay salaries and they didn't have any.
Hamas chose a very popular theme to go into this confrontation: the siege and the opening of Rafah terminal. So even those who are opposing to Hamas, they cannot object the demand to open the Rafah terminal.
Let me take you just to yes.
Lucy, I know I'm a guest, but can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
If we lift the siege in Israel, we'll say you can bring in whatever you want except weapons, and Hamas still continues to build tunnels with the cement instead of building schools. If there's another war and we attack again, will that decrease the support for Hamas in Gaza because we have lifted the siege?
The popularity of Hamas is already decreased. This is one. The problem of Hamas is refusing the Egyptian equation, which is logic. The Egyptians are saying, let's talk ceasefire now, and in the very next future, we are going to talk the security arrangement and the lifting of the blockade. Hamas is afraid that the lifting of the blockade, the credit will be given to the Palestinian Authority and not to Hamas. So they won't have any credit in the lifting of the process. Hamas is in a to be or not to be campaign. It is fighting for its existence.
So let's add to the equation what is happening in Syria, because we are actually dealing with what is happening with Operation Protective Edge and what is happening right now in the Gaza Strip and what is happening in Israel, in the south of Israel. But everybody's forgetting that Syria is still in a big war. Syria is still dominating the headlines outside of Israel and outside of the Gaza Strip. How much is actually this operation affecting the Arab world when they're seeing that in the last few days, 1,800 people were killed in Syria.
Yeah, but still the headlines are opening with the Gaza war. This is one thing, and far after come the Syrian fight. And if I still want to link the two stories, the Syrian one and the Gazan one, Assad, in his ceremony of the new term, he said, "We are with the Palestinian resistance, but the Palestinian people, the Palestinian."
He said something against Hamas.
Against Hamas. He said, we are with the resistance of the Palestinian people, the true resistance, not the falsified. Assad used this war to go against Israel, but also against Hamas.
Ayatollah Khamenei also says, he's also called for the arming of the West Bank. He said that we want to destroy, Israel must be destroyed, but of course by referendum, he said. We don't want to kill Jews, but it should be destroyed with a referendum. But until then, we have to also arm the West Bank. And I think, again, they are very happy, the Iranian side, to look at what's happening in Gaza, because it's taking the attention away from what is happening in Syria. And we can go to all these kinds of discussions that people are going to have about, why is it that people are not paying much attention to Syria, which they should. But at the end of the day, we should also remember that this is a conflict that's been going on for how many years? 40 odd years since the West Bank was 43 years since the West Bank was occupied, and this is dragging. And the sooner we find a solution, the sooner there's a ceasefire, I think the more Iran's going to find that the spotlight is going to be on them. And
by the way, the Palestinians in Gaza are so desperate that when you ask them about Erdogan, they would say, "Yeah, he is paying money. He is paying words." And nothing concrete. And people understand that Erdogan seeks to be the next Turkish president, that he doesn't want to escalate his relation with the West and with his own public. And beside the condemnation of Israel and comparing Israel to the Nazis, he did nothing concrete to the Palestinians in Gaza.
Gentlemen, first of all, it's always a pleasure with you too, and I'm always learning a lot from both of you. And Mayor, you can always ask questions. This is your studio as well. Thank you very much for coming to the studio. We're going out for another break, 2-minute break, and then we will be back. Don't go anywhere.
نحن في حزب الله نشعر أننا شركاء حقيقيون مع هذه المقاومة شراكة الجهاد والأخوة.
Israelis need to live free from rockets and from tunnels that threaten them.
يجب أن يسعى جميعا لإنهاء هذا النزاع.
We use missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles.
Welcome back to this I-24 News special edition. And of course, we continue our extended coverage of Operation Protective Edge. And right now, joining me in the studio, two of my favorite people. Hillel Shechner, good evening. Schenker, I'm sorry, Democratic, of course, representative of the Democratic Party in the United States. Good evening, here in Israel. And of course, Mark Tell, also the Republican representative here in Israel, within our broad, the chairman, of course. So, gentlemen, some may say that the United States found itself in a really uncomfortable situation in this current operation, if I may say so.
I think the United States has found itself in an uncomfortable situation throughout the Middle East for the past 6 weeks or 2 months, ever since Daesh, ISIS, took over a third of Iraq and a similar percentage of Syria. And now with its problems with the Egyptian government and now the Operation Protective Edge in Gaza, the United States seems to be doing everything it can wrong.
Well, I must say, coming directly from the front lines in Tel Aviv, and Mark, you're off in the West Bank quietly without any threat of...
Not so quiet anymore, Hillary.
Well, no, but no rockets hitting you. I must say that the people who are really uncomfortable right now are not the Americans. They are the Israelis living particularly in the south and the Palestinians in Gaza. And the Americans, well, Kerry and the Americans are trying to work out a ceasefire for the sake of both peoples.
Well, the problem with the Americans, Lucy, is that they've, and we've said this before on this program, they just don't read the geopolitics correctly, particularly this administration and particularly this Secretary of State, have just, from the beginning, misunderstood what role the Israeli-Palestinian conflict plays in the Middle East and the general developments in the Arab world. And they're constantly, based on this misreading of the territory, so to speak, the United States government has been making bad proposals. That's what happened with Kerry over the weekend. A series of proposals. Now, it doesn't happen very often that the entire Israeli government, will agree on a principle, particularly when it comes to an American ceasefire proposal. They just rejected it out of hand, and for good reason.
One way or another, I'm saying maybe the United States tried. The United States tried to get in the middle. They tried to bring the two sides together, to bring the Palestinians and the Israelis, sit down on a table, and tried all its best. We know that John Kerry spent a lot of time on air and off air and on the ground and off the ground by coming to the Middle East and trying to make these two reach an agreement. And at the end of the day, the United States got maybe to the conclusion that, you know what, you don't want to get to an agreement, do whatever you want, deal with your own problems. This is not the United States problem anymore.
We have a word in Hebrew, halavai. I wish that were the position of the United States with respect to making peace in the Middle East and making ceasefires in the Middle East. The United States would stop interfering and stop playing politics with some of the principal players here. And it's really strange to see the United States taking the position basically of Hamas in the ceasefire negotiations, aligning itself with the Emirate of Qatar and also with Turkey, who are sworn enemies of the state of Israel and have said the most unpleasant things about the Jewish state over the past year and certainly the past few days.
Mark, that's totally unfounded. You seem to forget the fact that Kerry just came from Cairo, where he sat together with the Egyptian foreign minister, and what he is doing is a work in progress. As he says, there is no actual formal proposal. It's being negotiated.
Did you read his proposals to the Israelis?
I read the leaks of what are supposed to be at a certain stage of proposal. The fact is that we Israelis and Palestinians cannot do these things on our own.
Abbas,
we need external help.
Was upset with them. Okay, this is not simply an Israeli versus Palestinian thing. Even the Palestinian Authority was upset with the position the United States was taking in favor of Abbas's enemy who's sitting in Gaza, Hamas.
Of a very complex situation where there are many players, and none of the players are totally at one with what the others are doing. But at least Kerry, after all, the Americans are the leading power in the world.
I agree with you about that. We're sitting in a region that there are a lot of players, and we're sitting on a region that basically we're speaking about a lot of money and a lot of big businesses. That
like $11 billion for the Qatari military bases.
So let's look at it.
And a lot of oil and a lot of money that the Americans have sent to build the Iron Dome, which has protected us.
And so just explain to me this game. Explain to me this double game, because I cannot understand it. From one side, the Americans are contributing and giving money for the Iron Dome and, of course, for the IDF and for other things that concern Israeli security
and for the Palestinian
But from
Authority.
the other side, we see that the Americans are afraid in one way or another of messing with Qatar, because there are a lot of money. We're talking about $11 billion with a business that is between the United States and Qatar. how can actually Israel rely on a country that it's playing on both sides?
As we all know.
Good question.
Okay, and the answer is that we know that the primary ally and backer of Israel is the United States in terms of security aid, in terms of political backing, and along with that, it's in an American interest, it also happens to be an Israeli interest, to try to arrive at security and stability, which in the end depends upon a diplomatic peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
That's a lot of gobbledygook, with all due respect.
This is our fundamental interest and our lives.
All right, no one's going to take issue with that. Everybody wants security. Everybody wants peace.
And who is going to help us achieve it?
Well, that's exactly the problem. For the first time in a lot of years, we have a president and an administration, and a Secretary of State, who really are quite conflicted about the assistance to Israel in a situation where Israel and its people are under attack.
Before I will ask you how you cannot be conflicted with Israel and the Middle East, I would just we'll get back to that. I just want to go again to our I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari, who is standing right now in the Israel-Gaza border. What is the current situation over there, Shai?
Yes, Lucy. Well, just a little while ago, we were forced to relocate, basically, from where we were reporting to you earlier on the northern Gaza Strip next to Beit Hanun. Basically, the army shut us down, and that has been an occurrence that has occurred a number of times, actually, since we've begun reporting in this area. We understood, as we reported earlier, there was quite a lot of activity going on in the northern Gaza Strip, and from what we understand, more is planned tonight. Since then, we have moved down south, closer to the Khan Yunis area, and I can tell you that here things are much quieter, and I'll also tell you that the general impression that we're getting this evening is one of a relative quiet here in the Gaza Strip this evening in comparison with let's say, last week, when almost every night we were hearing very intensive aerial bombardments and artillery bombardments and a lot of tank activity. This night, apart from what we were reporting earlier in the north, it seems relatively quiet, and the question, of course, is therefore on the table. Are we talking about some sort of general effort to, let's say, put things to sleep or make things calmer now as international dealings and negotiations are going on, getting into the more intense phase, and perhaps we are nearing some sort of resolution here? I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but of course the cabinet has some decisions to make, and let's see how it develops exactly.
Yeah, let's hope that the cabinet will take some harsh and definite decisions. Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very much for this for now. How can you not be divided? It's like, it's sometimes it feels like the boy who is between two divorced parents, and he needs to just looks at his mom and looks at his dad, and he says, okay, I cannot make everyone agree with me, and I want to make my mom happy, and I want to make my dad happy, and I'm the child. And this time the United States is finding itself in this position in front of the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Well, look, the United States is in a really tough position. It is conflicted, and as I said earlier, I think the best thing for the United States to have done, given the president's outlook on and about the role the United States should play in world affairs today, is I think the United States should just sit it out and let the parties work it out their own ways. I mean, the Israelis and the Egyptians, two unlikely allies, and allies is too strong a word, but they have, I'd say, coinciding interests, have an idea of how this thing should at least be handled in the short term. And the Hamas and Qatar and Turkey have another point of view. And there are others in the Arab world who are sitting around and taking one side or the other. A lot of them are actually not, sort of tacitly supporting the Egyptian role in this thing. And I think we could learn something from the Egyptians. I think the Americans could learn something from the Egyptians. Something needs to be done here in the long run. I'm not talking about the ultimate solutions. They're not going to happen easily. But what does have to be done, seems to me, as a kind of a minimum, as a result of this operation, I would hope that it happens in any case, is that the Gaza Strip will be demilitarized, that these offensive weapons will simply no longer be available to whoever's there to make use of against Israel. And secondly, that these this extensive tunneling network, which is also basically established for offensive purposes, be shut down. Now, it seems to me that of all that, that's a lot of money. A lot of millions and millions of dollars is spent on these weapons and on this infrastructure. If that money would have been put into developing the potentiality of the Gaza Strip and its population, I mean, we would be in a different world today. But that's not the case. And this particular group, the Hamas, for whatever reason, I mean, for whatever motivates it, has now decided that it's going for broke. And those millions are being spent on trying to hurt Israel.
First of all, one thing that we haven't mentioned is that, sadly and tragically, 43 Israeli soldiers have died since this operation began. Over 1,000 Palestinians in Gaza have died, most of them civilians, women and children. We do know that. We do know that. We have the international media there, which
1,032.
I'm sorry, these are the numbers. And the fact is,
and 400 or 500 of them are according to IDF
excuse me,
combatants.
Mark. The first priority should be to stop the killing and the dying, and then to resume a political process. And yes, not with Hamas. Hamas is not going to be an address. It has to be a resumed serious political process between the Israeli government and the government led by Mahmoud Abbas. And in other words, excuse me, he is still the president, the chairman, the head of the party. Right. And as long as this continues, his position is being undermined. What we really need is to get back to the Kerry Initiative and to resume negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Hamas. Look,
no, it wasn't. On the contrary.
On the contrary, it's exactly what it was going to give. Let's tell the viewers the truth,
if the initiative had moved forward, then Hamas would be in that much more weakened position.
Exactly the opposite.
These 20 days of fighting have increased the position, the power of Hamas.
You're misleading the viewers.
This is the reality. Everybody is seeing that.
But look, I ask you, as always, when you and I speak, there's a paucity of facts on your part.
The quicker we reduce the power of Hamas.
Excuse me. What the Kerry Initiative would have done was basically put the Hamas demands on the table.
Not at all.
Right now, as part.
Excuse me, I wasn't talking about the ceasefire. I'm talking about the resumption of Israeli-Palestinian political negotiations.
You're talking in the clouds.
I can tell you part of what the Kerry offer was 48 hours after the ceasefire, starting to negotiate with Egypt, freezing the military actions and the military operations from both sides, and then continuing 5 to 7 days of course, working between
what are the details? That's where the devil is.
The discussions, and then the work. No, and then the work. And I will tell you,
it's going on right now.
The work in progress is to open the crossroads, of course, and to open the Rafah cross border, the border, freeing the prisoners that were arrested after Shalit,
another Hamas demand
affair, and of course. Expanding the
12-mile fishing zone.
Yes, the fishing zone,
and
putting and helping to assist building a port in the Gaza port, which should, but in a surprising way, Hamas didn't accept that as well.
Yes.
It's just so what?
Well, what Hamas has done after 12 o'clock today, while it continues to shoot some 60 rockets into Israel, is asking for a humanitarian ceasefire again, which is a sign that things may be turning in the Israelis' direction. But here, I would like to consider the following thing in terms of the current conflict, and not some pie in the sky future thing that will happen in 5 or 10 years, as Hilla was talking about.
5 or 10 years.
I'm talking
about tomorrow.
Right now. You saw what the international community tried to do in Syria. With some success. A lot of people would say not very much, I would say, but at least they got some.
Chemical weapons.
Okay, excellent. Here we go. Now listen to me here, Hillel. What I'm suggesting here, and since you think the world did such a great job with the Syrian chemical weapons, I think the world that is the international community, should take responsibility. Instead of just complaining about all these tragic deaths of civilians that are occurring, I mean, and are more or less unavoidable in a situation like this, that the international community step up to the plate and take responsibility for doing what it did to the PLO in Beirut in 1982, 83, and did in Syria recently, and take responsibility for getting these offensive weapons out of the hands of Hamas.
I'd like to remind you that President Abbas has committed himself to the idea of a demilitarized Palestinian state.
Beautiful.
If we get a resumption of serious negotiations
between
the Israeli government. I'm talking about
Gentlemen, I just
as soon
want to
after
take
the
you,
ceasefire, resuming negotiations.
We were talking about the current situation in the Gaza Strip,
Please.
and after we will see, I want to show you a piece that we made today. Afterwards, I would like to ask you if maybe the United States should just stop intervening with what is happening in the Middle East. Before you answer, let's see. During the wartime, darkness takes on many forms. For Gazans suffering from constant power blackouts, the darkness is very literal. I-24 News reporter Daniel Roth has the following story.
As Israel's military operation in Gaza continues, access to electricity in the Palestinian enclave has become much scarcer. According to Gisha, an Israeli NGO focused on Palestinian accessibility, Gaza's only power plant, which produces 50 megawatts of electricity, suffered a direct hit by Israeli forces on Wednesday. It had to be shut down until repairs could be made. Gisha reports that of the 120 megawatts that Gaza purchases from Israel, less than 50 are running.
We were turning on the generators for the past 3 days. We do not have water or electricity. They did not warn us before. Suddenly they attacked the building and the mosque.
The Kerem Shalom crossing is the only place that goods can be transferred between Israel and Gaza, and transfer with Egypt via the Rafah crossing has been totally blocked off. Since July 6th, Israel has restricted goods coming through to just medicine, food, and fuel. The NGO says 6 of 10 power lines running from Israel into the Gaza Strip have been damaged. A great deal of people in Gaza may be without proper water and sanitation due to the outages.
Water is a problem, and it can quickly turn out into a catastrophe. We do have hundreds of thousands of people without water in Gaza. So water repair have been conducted in very difficult conditions. Water engineers have been killed, and this obviously hampered a lot the work.
For the more than 1.7 million Palestinians living in Gaza, lack of electricity is a regular occurrence. Blackouts can last many hours, causing interruptions in the flow of everyday life during normal times. During these days of escalated violence, though, as casualty counts grow and hundreds of thousands are without electricity, conditions are more dire than ever.
We've been talking a lot about, educating people all over again, trying to help them. And sometimes we have the feeling that the United States don't understand the region, don't understand the culture, don't understand the way that Israelis...
I've heard that somewhere before.
The way that Israelis speaks, the way that Israelis talks, or the way that Palestinians speak and talk. Yeah. Especially President Barack Obama, who is trying always to be in the middle, but doesn't really understand what is being in the middle means exactly.
Well, I think you ought to respond to that.
Therefore, you originally said maybe the Americans should just step aside and let us, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Egyptians, everybody work it out by ourselves.
I'm just asking, maybe really this region cannot deal with anything without the United States.
In other words, maybe you're saying that there are no solutions, or are you saying that we are capable of working it out on our own? The record doesn't indicate that we can do it. I don't. I'm afraid that we can't. And as a matter of fact, if I look at Israeli history, all of the critical junctures in history, the Balfour Declaration, the partition plan, what happened in '56, the Camp David Accords, in all of these cases, there was a need for external facilitation aid. And I think in this case, too, we need it. And it's also an American interest too. The Americans are not going to just step aside. There is oil, there's geopolitical, there is the Holy Land. There are so many factors.
A lot of money.
There's a lot of money, and there are Jews, and there are Christians, and there's Jerusalem. From all of these reasons, Muslims, of course.
Yes.
For all of these reasons.
We remember the speech that he gave in Cairo. We remember the speech that he said that Barack Obama talked to the world and talked about peace with the Muslim world and talked to the heart of the
people. And we remember the
Egypt.
Nobel Peace Prize he received before, as he became president, okay, which is...
For peace.
Yes, the world is not exactly more peaceful today as
essentially they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize because of the relief that the world community had that Bush was no longer president.
That's a good reason to give a peace prize.
That's why.
Right,
I don't think that's necessarily a good reason why.
Let the viewers get the history straight. Again, Hillel, you've got a great skill in misstating it. All right,
I'm describing the chronology.
The point is about the parties to the conflict taking the initiative to resolve it. 1977. It was Sadat and it was Begin, and we know the whole history of that. To the great surprise of Jimmy Carter in the United States, who took the initiative, the Israelis and the Egyptians took the initiative in making peace. Now, the United States later on, Carter himself
Carter played a critical role to ensure that it was
but that
resolved.
happened later on. At first was the initiative of the two parties.
One of your Republicans, Kissinger, played a major role in terms of the disengage agreements.
I'm not even going to overstate Kissinger's role.
With Egypt.
It was also
a very important role.
the case of your favorite agreement, the Oslo agreements, okay, which you on the left love to no end. That was an initiative of your friends, the Professor Hirschfeld and the late Ron Pundak and Yossi Beilin, all running behind the backs of their appointed leadership to make this approach to the PLO that led to the debacle, in my view, that's called Oslo.
If you look at the history, actually, that is the only case. That's the only serious case where the initiative was essentially homegrown.
Let me bring to you the example of the Jordanian-Israeli peace agreement, okay?
Which would not have been possible without the Oslo Accords.
Well, but that was an Israeli-Palestinian initiative, okay?
Yeah.
That's what happened there, okay? I'm not in any way defending the Oslo Accords. Just a second.
Where were the Oslo Accords signed? On the White House lawn.
Okay,
who
was
the world leader who was invited to the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty?
The Russians.
President Clinton.
The Russians and the Americans. The Russians who just shot down the Malaysian plane over Ukraine. I mean, let's just put the facts on the table. The fact is, the parties here are capable, and where there is intelligent, realistic, pragmatic, and well-intentioned assistance from the United States and other parties, that can help. But this administration, I'm very, very sorry. I can say it. President Netanyahu won't say it. The defense minister won't say it.
Because you're a Republican and you oppose his policies. And you would like to see America be the cop of the world.
Relax,
we know that.
Relax.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world, okay, is looking at the United States through this jaundiced prism. The Americans and this administration have let the world down. It's not only
I-24, and I'm afraid that you watch Fox News all the time.
Gaza.
And that's where you get your ideas from.
So let me, before we have only 2 minutes.
It's the Ukraine, it's North Korea, it's Syria, it's Iraq,
we have only 2 minutes. You know, we're always talking about the American administration.
You mentioned the magic word Iraq. Who created the mess in Iraq? George Bush. The Republican president.
This is what I wanted just to ask you, and maybe just to tease you a little bit more.
Go ahead, please. You do that very well.
I do that very well. You know, we've been talking a lot about Barack Obama, and of course, you know, we have our amount of criticism about the way that this administration is acting and doing what it's doing around the world. But did Bush did it any different way? Did Bush understood the Middle East any better than Clinton?
Know the difference between Sunni and Shia.
Or
He didn't understand
Barack
anything.
Obama?
Here we go with Hillel and his ad hominem remarks. Look, I'm not going to say George Bush.
I hate to bring history into
we
it,
are
but
6 years into the Obama 6 years into the Obama administration.
This shows what
wait
a
a
terrible debacle we are left with
There,
from
you want an answer?
legacy
Or you want,
from the Republican administration.
Here we go. But there has to come a
going to let
time
Mark
when you
answer.
got to grow up and you got to take responsibility for your acts. Barack Obama came into office with the 2009 Cairo speech and a whole series of policy reforms vis-a-vis the Russians, vis-a-vis Iraq. And if you want to talk about Iraq, you can criticize the Bush administration for getting into Iraq. At the end of the Bush administration, the Iraq problem had been solved militarily, and what the Obama administration did and missed and has to take direct responsibility for, and your own party leaders are saying it, is what happened when the United States couldn't reach an agreement with the Iraqi about the stationing of American troops. And what was the result?
Are you wanting more American troops in Iraq?
ISIS.
The American people do not want more American. It's not populist. The American public does not want troops.
We're going to continue just arguing here. We're going out. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We're going out for a small break, 2-minute break, and then we will be back.
نحن في حزب الله نشعر أننا شركاء حقيقيون مع هذه المقاومة شراكة الجهاد والأخوة.
Israelis need to live free from rockets and from tunnels that threaten them.
يجب أن يسعى جميعا لإنهاء هذا النزاع.
We use missiles to protect our people. They use their people to protect their missiles.
Welcome back to this I-24 News special edition. Of course, we continue our extended and special coverage of Operation Protective Edge. And right now with me in the studio is Professor Karine Nahon, an expert on politics and information from Washington University and the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also Ashraf Al-Ajrami, a former Palestinian government minister. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And Ghalib Majadli, former Israeli deputy.
I am not
foreign.
Ghalib Majadli. I am Majadli Wahbi.
Majadli Wahbi. I'm sorry.
Majadli Wahbi.
Majadli Wahbi. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Former, of course, Israeli deputy foreign minister. Thank you very much. Had the name of one of my colleagues here, so I got confused. I'm so sorry. Let's. Gentlemen and my lady, and I will start with you, with the current, let's say, discussion that is happening right now in Israel, and it's the public opinion, and let's say the social media, and what we're watching in the social media, and that the ministers and politicians are basically having the discussion with their voters on the social media, and according to the number of likes that they're getting on Facebook. And it seems that it's made some kind of a, let's say, a wall between the actual public opinion and what is happening on the street and what is happening in the cabinet meetings and in the government, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if it's really a wall, but I can definitely see that the social media is kind of like reflecting a particular kind of reality, but on the same time, it is changing the reality. So we've seen a little bit of the violence that has been shifted a little bit from the virtual world to physical world. That's one thing that we've seen, and we've seen also the intolerant kind of voices that we see that pushes a little bit outside of the consensus. causes. And the politicians are in the same game. Basically, they would like to explain to the voters what is going on. They're saying one thing in the cabinet, another thing in the social media. They're thinking on the day after. They're thinking about what's going to happen in the elections. And that's part of the game, but it's not the same game as before, because people know exactly what was in the cabinet. So there is a kind of a double-edged transparency that is happening here, and where ministers don't understand that the game has changed.
But do people really know what is happening in the government? Do people really know how the decision-making and the fact that this playground is new and that the politicians are playing to think about the next day and to think about the next elections? Do people really know that?
I think people
that it's
know. I mean,
bigger than this. Because when I'm looking at the conversation that is happening if we can call it a conversation that is happening in the social media, it sometimes seems that it's not even a conversation. It's just that people are just putting things out there and saying things and defining things, and that's it. And the politicians are just going after the people and not vice versa.
Yeah, you're talking about leadership, and unfortunately in the last few weeks we haven't seen a lot of leadership kind of aspects to the different kind of arguments that each one of them says. However, I do think that people know that the social media is changing the rules of the game, and we've seen that with the rumors that have been spread off on WhatsApp saying about the names of the people who have been dying, and talking about the troops who are entering into Gaza. Before that, we didn't know those things. So people are aware of the different changing rules of the game. The question is, what do you do with those changing rules? And it doesn't happen only here. It happens all over the world, right?
And how much it's affecting the politicians and how much it's affecting the decision-making, because it seems that it's a new new player on the ground, and it's not the army, and it's not the diplomacy.
The cabinet meetings, they are telling all the facts exactly. And they are not, the politicians, allowed to bring it outside. Sometimes some of the politicians try to pick from the media, from even stories that are around the public, and put it in order to talk about and use it for their interests. But sometimes we found ourselves, and the cabinet knows exactly what's going, and they keep the secrets. And when they are talking outside, they try to make the direction of their thoughts, political thoughts, in order to bring their supporters to to be satisfied on the decisions. And always we are finding ourselves, sometimes some of the politicians playing with their supporters in order to get in the future what they would like to achieve.
Ashraf, Mr. Al-Ajrami, were you addressing the Palestinian people through Facebook and through Twitter?
Yes, of course. It is a very active movement in the Facebook and the Twitter nowadays. I think that the Palestinian youth especially are very active in the social media, and it somehow affects very much the political leadership, because if you can see criticism against the President Mahmoud Abbas or against the political leadership, you can see it, especially in the social media. People criticized the leadership all the time, criticized Hamas movement, criticized everything. But
are the Palestinian people having right now this inner discussion about the current situation? Are they criticizing Hamas, like you said, and criticizing the Palestinian government for not doing something to actually end this?
Yes, there are, but in the mainstream, in this social media, I think the people, the majority of people, support the Gazans, the people in Gaza, and some of them, because of the situation, support the residents in Gaza, especially Hamas and Al-Jihad movement, because of what happens in Gaza Strip against the civilians. But there are few and strong voices also against Hamas movement. They also think that Hamas is responsible and somehow of what happens in Gaza Strip. And this is kind of discussion that just we see it in the social media, not in the TV channels and other.
Because if they will say it out loud and not in the social media, they will face a different, let's say, penalty than in any democratic country, because the rules are different.
They will face different penalty, but they won't have the same supporters that they have in the social media. It's much more easier to get different, all the groups that support your argument in social media, because they gather together, and then it's much more easier to kind of like push forward your argument. But you may pay for it. So for example, if you see Lieberman this week when he was like saying there won't be any other ceasefire, and an hour after the cabinet voted for the ceasefire, so that puts him in a very kind of strange situation, right?
Contradiction.
In a contradiction, if you'd like to say it more politely.
In an uncomfortable situation.
Yeah. So it's interesting. People tend to say more arguments in the social media as a kind of an escape, as a kind of a place where they can kind of like gather with their supporters. But the penalties are very high, because once you say something and it turns out to be wrong, you pay the bill. And I don't know when Lieberman will pay the bill, but obviously that costed him some.
Do politicians pay the bill? Or they are because so much lack of responsibility we see on social media. It's so much not the things that people are saying and the racism that comes out in social media. So it's supposed to be such a democratic tool to the people, and becomes like the most undemocratic tool that it can be. But politicians do understand that maybe they should not play in this
the politicians use very well.
They use it very well, or they don't know how to use it.
Not all of them. Sometimes, some of them, they are outside of the blue. They are not doing nothing with the social and all of these modern media. But few of them playing. Look what's going. We are talking about ministers like the Minister of Finance or other ministers who are talking to the people via the social media, and. Not even if he come to declare something, he will do it firstly to the people who are always looking at what he's writing and what he's doing and what he's going to say. Even he can get the salary from these people in the elections. That means people read and know how to use this, and politicians, most of them use this media by themselves or by assistants who are writing all of the news.
Social media also did and maybe contributed to a lot of protests here, of course, in Israel and in the Arab world, what we call it the so-called the Arab Spring. Let's see how it's contributed to the protests that we're seeing right now in Europe. Joining me right now is Jonathan Sachadoti, I-24 News London correspondent. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Jonathan, a lot of protests, anti-Israel and pro-Israel in London. Is it making the people in London and in Britain worry a little bit about the current situation, or are they seeing it as something normal?
There's no question that there's been a huge amount of protest against Israel's actions in Gaza over the last few days and weeks in the UK, particularly in London. We've seen some very big rallies marching against the war in Gaza. But I don't think that it's necessarily having much of an effect on the political class, who have come out repeatedly saying that they defend Israel's right to defend itself, and that they firmly believe, the government, that Hamas started this with the barrage of rockets into Israel, and that Israel has a right to defend itself. Of course, the images of casualties, especially children, that are coming out of Gaza means that public opinion is somewhat shifting, and there is something of a move towards people wanting this to end. The politicians are saying they want a ceasefire, as they are across the world, and that seems to be the pressure being put upon Israel now. The main people who seem to be most affected by these repeated protests are in fact the Jewish community, who have noticed that these protests in Europe and in London specifically, but also we've seen notably in Paris. They have realized that these protests seem to awaken in their societies a large degree of Jew hatred, regardless of what the prompt is. In this case, the war in Gaza, they're noticing an increase in attacks on Jews, bricks through synagogue windows like we saw in Belfast, in Northern Ireland's only synagogue, on 2 consecutive nights.
We're watching like the footage coming from Britain and coming from France, and a lot of Hezbollah flags, a lot of Iranian flags, a lot of basically a lot of symbols that maybe Europe should be really worried about.
I think it's more than a maybe, and sadly this isn't actually new. In the Iranian-sponsored Al-Quds Day, which takes place annually in London, you often see those kind of flags that show affiliation to terrorist organizations. I think most British people on the street don't have any idea what those flags mean, but we're seeing in these crowds increasing numbers of the far left, the extreme left, and increasing numbers of those who are affiliated with Islamic or Islamist ideology organizations. They don't necessarily represent all Muslims in the country at all, but those factions are feeling more and more able to take to the streets and to threaten Jews and to threaten the values of Great Britain. And I do think that that's something that the country needs to worry about and has needed to for some time.
Yes, Jonathan Sashadoti, thank you very much for this. We're talking a lot about changing the minds, changing the way of people think and educating people. And we know that the social media contributed a lot to the Arab Spring and contributed a lot to what happened in the Arab world. There is a big difference between moving people and getting them get out of their chair and get up of their chairs and get out and protest than actually educating them and explaining to them what is democracy is all about. And it's not only by talking on Facebook and tweeting on Twitter, but it's also enabling it on the ground. What happened to people after they're getting out of their computer and going outside and realizing that it's totally different than the cyber world that they're living in?
I'm not sure it's totally different. If I'm thinking about, for example, the Tahrir, kind of like the Arab Spring in Egypt, there weren't a lot of people that were in the social media at that time, although they call it the Facebook kind of revolution. But if you look really at the numbers, they're very small. However, the social media was able to create new forces that challenged the traditional power. And that's the main thing, right? You said it's changing the mind. And then you get out again and you find out that, okay, not a lot has changed. I do believe that the social media has power to change for the long run, in the sense like people are already different because they understand that there are different powers, different information. Like, for example, last week, Minister Erdogan wanted to close Al Jazeera. And I was like,
and Lieberman also.
And Lieberman also. And I was like, hello, people can really get into those channels through the internet, through other places. The fact that you're closing things does not mean that you cannot access information, right? And it's an important information. Some things that we don't see here. So going back to the social media, it's not really that you go out and
more
it's
than
different.
that, most of the Israelis are not watching Al Jazeera. Most of the Israelis are watching CNN and BBC. But the people who are watching Al Jazeera are Israeli Arabs. And this is by preventing and opening an entire discussion about the Israeli Arabs and the way that the government is treating the minorities in Israel, and is it treating them in a fair way, yes or no? And this is exactly the point that I want to take you, because what happened during the weekend with 2 people that were hit in East Jerusalem as Operation Protective Edge grins on violent clashes between Palestinians and the IDF are becoming a future of the West Bank. Meanwhile, 2 East Jerusalem Palestinians are in hospital after being severely beaten on Friday, and Israeli police are on high alert for fear that ultra-nationalists will launch fragile and violent attacks against Arabs. I-24 News reporter Danielle Campus has the story.
As the ongoing Gaza conflict stirs up anger and violence, in the West Bank, protesters constantly clash with the Palestinian Authority security forces and with the IDF. So far, in separate incidents involving both the Israeli army and protesters, a total of 6 Palestinian protesters have been killed and over 150 have been wounded. Some of the protests have been massive, in figures reaching even 20,000 participants, as seen in Ramallah.
The world has been asking us to peacefully march in thousands of people. This is what we did today. And the Israeli army is encountering us with shooting people, peaceful, non-violent demonstrators who are demonstrating here in solidarity with our people who are massacred in Gaza and demanding freedom. But this is because of the Israeli behavior. This is the beginning of the third intifada. A popular, non-violent, yet determined to get freedom from this Israeli occupation.
Clashes in other cities like Bethlehem and East Jerusalem also continue and have placed the security forces on high alert. Meanwhile, 2 Arab residents of East Jerusalem were hospitalized on Friday night after being beaten by a Jewish mob in the capital. The shocking pictures of the men injured in the attack were being virally shared on Israeli social networks. The police is currently investigating who is behind the attacks and what was the motive. The expanding scale of the conflict in Gaza has placed mounting pressure on the Palestinian Authority and on Israeli security forces to stop further escalation and prevent terrorist attacks and nationalistic or religiously motivated lynchings or vigilante attacks on innocent civilians.
Mr. Al-Ajrami, if we're comparing this operation to other operations, the West Bank is relatively calm. And we are seeing a really hard operation in the Gaza Strip. How come?
I don't think so. I think that this is the first time that the West Bank reacts very strongly about what happened in Gaza Strip. We see...
We remember bigger clashes and bigger protests in the West Bank than in this operation, because it seems that this time, I don't know, maybe someone from the Palestinian Authority is preventing this to not deteriorate, to not escalate in the West Bank also, especially after what happened with the 3 kidnappers.
Yes, this was the policy of the Palestinian Authority, to prevent people to clash with the Israeli checkpoints and the Israeli soldiers at the beginning. But after it became wider, demonstrations, the Palestinian Authority security services didn't want to be in a very bad situation after the strong criticism against the President Mahmoud Abbas and the authority security services. They accused them of being collaborator with the Israeli security services and against the Palestinian people. So they somehow led them to express their opinion and to do demonstration. But until this moment, this is under control. We don't think that there is a third intifada until this moment. But if the operation continues in Gaza Strip, I think it will be hard to control people in the West Bank, and the demonstration will be out of control at all.
I want to talk to you. Yes.
Okay. I think, what's going in the West Bank, we should see the facts on the ground. The economic changes, the remove of most of the Israeli checkpoints, the normal life. If we look in the last 2 years, that the people, you cannot find one room in the hotels of Bethlehem. You cannot find people who in Jenin. Most of the Israeli Arabs going for shopping there. Yeah. The economic situation changed the thoughts of the Palestinian people. And they would like to continue to achieve the solution of 2 states for the 2 people. This is my feeling that some of we have, as in Israel, the extremists, right extremist people who are politicians.
What's right. Exactly about this I wanted to speak with you, because it seems that...
Pushing the people from the Israeli side or the politicians to be more active and more to use the power. The same, we have some extremism from the left or other parties who are against the Palestinian Authority or different thoughts.
We see what happened to these 2 Palestinian boys from East Jerusalem being beaten up because they are ours, because people heard them speaking Arabic, and they were beaten up by two ultra-nationalist Jews. And this discussion already started, this violent discussion already started in the social media. It started on Facebook, and it started on Twitter, and it started on the talkbacks on each and every website, Israeli website. And it seems that people are saying, you should not pay attention to these people. These people are only yelling. These people are not acting. You should not give them a stage. But it seems that these extremists are actually making and putting and doing an impact and on the ground. And this is not just another talkback on the internet. These are actions that it seems that the leadership is not paying any attention to.
I'm not sure they're not paying attention. It's just like the tools that you can really address those things is very limited at this point. And you're right. What we see now is
too much importance to social media when it becomes very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I think now they're starting, but it's just the beginning to give the importance to what's the meaning of all those groups that are constituted via the social media. We've seen a lot of different groups that are extremists, right extremists, like one of them is El Yahud gang, the other one is, kill all the Arabs. There are different kind of groups, and each one of them is between 5,000 to 30,000 people. And the truth is that if you look at the internet, it has a very strong potential to grab people from different marginal groups. And that's the dangerous. The dangerous is how do you dissolve those groups, and how do you, in a way, allow the more mainstream, or the more people who are for the two-state solution, for a more peaceful kind of solution, to give their talk to talk. Today, it's very dangerous to talk if you are not in the consensus, or very narrow. And it's enough that you'll move one step out of this consensus. You can be bitten up physically and virtually.
And virtually, yes, definitely.
But the Minister of Justice, Tzipi Livni, and the advisor of the government, the legislative advisor of the government, they began to look after these people from the two sides to try to let them stop this kind of conversation in the social media.
How do you see the situation of the Israeli Arabs in this whole, let's say, really complex situation?
I think the Israeli Arabs, the most of them would like to have the solution of two states for the two people, even to come back to the 17 border. And we, I see all of the leaders, of the Arab leaders, try. I'm not talking about
Haneen Zarbi, yes, parliament member Haneen Zarbi.
I'm looking about the head of the municipalities. I'm looking about the other members of parliament, the other leaders, the Arab leaders would like, at the end of the day, would like to achieve the peace with our neighbors. And they are even, what happened in Gaza Strip and all of the shooting towards Israel, against the innocent people, against some, Arabs from the Negev killed because of this shooting. Mm-hmm. That means we would like to find the normal direction that we can live, and we know that we still to fight and to work hard to achieve what we call equal and normal life in Israel. It's not easy. I remember Ariel Sharon, he said always, it's so difficult to be Jewish, but it's more difficult to be Palestinian in this region. That means that we still to work hard. The majority of the normal people, that they can work hard to bring the two sides to a normal life. I think we work hard to achieve the peace, but the situation that we come from one side, we have the Palestinian Authority. From the other side, we have people in the south.
Suffering every day.
Suffering every day.
Years,
and
yes.
we look what's this leadership of Hamas and the other, they are not looking for the interest of the Palestinians.
Gentlemen, you said something, leadership. You make me miss leaders and miss leadership. Gentlemen, thank you very much, my lady. Thank you very much for coming to the studio. We're off for tonight, only for tonight. Tomorrow we'll be back at the same time, same place from the Jaffa Port. Have a peaceful night. Good night.